My name is Brian. For the record, my name is Brian Worrell, District 4 City Councilor, and I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on City Services and Innovation Technology. Today is December 12th, 2023. This hearing is being recorded, is also being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Fios Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.csit@boston.gov. It will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. Individuals will be called on the order in which they signed up and will have 2 minutes to testify. If you're interested in testifying in person, please add your name to the sign-up sheet near the entrance of the chamber. If you're looking to testify virtually, please email our Central Staff Liaison, Megan Kavanaugh, at megan.kavanaugh@boston.gov. That's MEGHAN.KAVANAGH@boston.gov for the link, and your name will be added to the list. During today's hearing, we will discuss 4 dockets representing supplemental appropriation orders that will cover collective bargaining agreements for the Boston School Department Plan Administration, Administrators Association, and the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association. I'll be breaking down this hearing into 2 parts. First, we'll go through dockets 1578 and 1579, and in the second half, we'll go through dockets 1812 and 1813. I'll now read into the record docket number 1578. Message in order for your approval in order to reduce the FY24 appropriation for the Reserve for Collective Bargaining by $145,545 to provide funding for the Boston Public Schools for FY24 increases contained within the collective bargaining agreements between the Boston Public Schools and the Boston School Department Plan Administrators Association, filed in the office of the City Clerk on October 16, 2023. Docket number 1579, message in order for a supplemental appropriation order for the Boston School Department for FY24 in the amount of $145,545 to cover the FY24 costs contained within the collective bargaining agreement between the Boston Public Schools and the Boston School Department Plan Administrators Association. The terms of the contract are September 1st, 2020 through August 31st, 2026. The major provisions of the contract include base wage increases of 2%, 2.5%, 2.5%, 2.5%, and 2% to be given in September of each fiscal year of the contract terms. The agreement also includes increase to on-call pay and comp time policies. These matters were sponsored by the administration and referred to the committee on October 18, 2023. For these dockets, I'm joined by my council colleagues, Councilor Murphy, Council President Ed Flynn, Councilor Durkin, Councilor Lara, and Councilor Coletta. I would now like to introduce today's panelists testifying on behalf of the administration, beginning with dockets number 1578 and 1579 regarding FY24 increases contained within the collective bargaining agreements between the Boston Public Schools and the Boston School Department Plan Administrators Association. Today we have with us Budget Director of the City of Boston, James Williamson, and Director of Office of Labor Relations for Boston Public Schools, Jeremiah Hassan. First, I'll start with a few brief remarks before we delve into the details. I'd like to pose a few questions that have been on my mind. So my questions for these dockets would be that who will be instrumental in the development of the Boston School Department Plant Administrators Association? I also want to know how the formation of the association contributes to the enhancements of Boston Public Schools. I know that the collaborative efforts and expertise involved in shaping this association are undoubtedly crucial, and we will look forward to the discussion today as we discuss the order to reduce the FY24 appropriation for the reserve for the collective bargaining. It is important for us to recognize the broader implications and benefits for the education community. I'm eager to explore these aspects further during our deliberation. For docket number 1579, I'm particularly interested in understand how the base wage increases will be executed and integrated into the existing structure, and what plans are in place to ensure a smooth implementation that aligns with the terms of the agreement. I'm also curious about the strategies and mechanisms in place for data collection and analysis. How do we plan to assess the impact of these adjustments of the school administrations, the overall functioning of the Boston School Department? I believe the robust data collection is key to informed decision-making, and I look forward to insights on how this is being prioritized. Thank you for joining us today, and now I'd like to pass it on to my council colleagues for any opening statements. Councilor Murphy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I know questions here I have on the BPS one is who are these 16 employees and how do they oversee the custodians? It's just the question I have to start, please, if you have that answer.
Wait, we'll go to just for opening remarks, and then we'll see if they have a presentation, and then we'll open up the question. You'll skip? Okay.
But I thought we, okay.
Councilor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to wait until after the two gentlemen speak, and then I'll follow up with questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Councilor Durkin?
Excited to dive in here more. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Councilor Lara?
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you so much. I have no opening statements, and I don't have any specific questions about Boston Public Schools, so I'll wait for the presentation and ask after.
Thank you. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you, Chair. No opening remarks. Good morning. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Thank you. The floor is now yours.
Good. Thank you, Chair Worrell and other members of the City Council. My name is Jim Williamson. I'm, as you said, the Budget Director for the City of Boston. I'm joined by Jeremiah Hassan, who is the Director of Labor Relations at BPS. My colleagues, myself, appreciate this opportunity to provide information for the first half of the hearing about the Boston Public Schools and the Plan Administrators Union, and then later on in the second part of the hearing for the Boston Police Patrolmen Association union contracts and their impacts to the city budget. It's always important to acknowledge the shared responsibility the City Council has, and jointly with the administration, to safeguard and manage limited public resources in this critical role in service to the citizens of Boston. I'm here to address the four appropriation orders that are before you and the transactions they represent in the budget. So the first set of dockets, 1578, 1579, reduces the collective bargaining reserve by $145,545 and increases BPS's budget by the same amount. In the current budget, the FY24 budget, which was finalized in June of 2023, it included a $76.2 million collective bargaining reserve. Since July 1, 2023, the City Council has passed 5 collective bargaining supplementals, drawing on the reserve, and with amounts totaling roughly $28 million for the 5 of these city and 1 BPHC union. Collectively, with both the plan administrators and the police supplementals, the reductions in the reserve, which total $16.9 million for these 2 unions, the balance of the reserve after processing or with the hopeful approval of these orders will be $31.3 million. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague for any other comments about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman. Councilor Chair Worrell and fellow councilors, thank you for having me today. I'm excited to present this contract and request your support in the appropriation request. So just to speak to Councilor Murphy's question, this is a group of 16 employees. They are made up primarily of area managers, and then there's building service managers and groundskeeper managers. And so they oversee the facilities work, custodial services, and groundskeeping at district buildings and on district property. They oversee roughly 500 full and part-time custodians across the district, and they really act as the first point of contact between our school leaders and our facilities management team. So it's a small group comprised of 16 members, but they really play a critical role in making sure that our buildings and school leaders get the custodial services and the building management services that they need in the district. This is a group that we've had a great partnership with throughout the pandemic, hardworking group. They are always willing to kind of go above and beyond their work. So, you know, we're excited for this contract. We think it's a fair contract. It's, as you may know, the wage pattern is fairly consistent with all of our other facilities units. So we're excited to get this deal done, especially before the new year for this group. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions you have about either their role or the contract.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to my council colleagues for questions. Councilor Murphy?
And thank you for the explanation. So they don't work for BPS facilities and they don't work for the custodians. They're like in between?
So they do work under the facilities umbrella. So they
Under
are
Brian?
generally out of, yeah, so they're overseen by PJ and Brian Ford.
Brian Ford.
Yeah, PJ Priscanis and Brian
Okay.
Ford.
And they would be the contact, like when it snows and there's a concern between, well, that's BPS budget, we don't plow like Public Works, so they're the ones that we can contact to help alleviate any outside buildings, not just inside the building concerns?
So yes, like typically it would be a school leader, you know, might come on Monday and say, oh, you know, a spot was missed maybe in the plowing or the shoveling, and the area manager for that school would be the first point of contact to say, you know, can you help either make sure our custodians cover the whole area, or if we need additional outside services, make sure that those services are provided for an individual school.
And do they oversee also when contracts are given out, like asbestos removal and window replacements, and when there's outside contractors who bid out jobs that are in the buildings?
So I believe they would be involved in the conversations
Sometimes, okay.
of what's needed at the school, but it would not be directly on them to
Okay.
do that work.
And so they're like housed out of Campbell Resource Center?
That's correct.
Okay, so that makes sense. Okay, thank you. No other questions?
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to these gentlemen for being here, for the important work that you're doing. Let me ask a question first to Jim, I guess. The increased comp time limit from 240 hours to 500 hours, or to Jeremiah as well, does that mean they don't receive overtime pay, or explain why that is needed?
Yeah, that's correct. This group is awarded comp time in lieu of overtime pay. The cap is up, we realized in prior years. I think last year was actually a good winter budget-wise because we didn't have a lot of snow. But in winters where we do get many snowstorms, that's really where we see a lot of the necessary overtime from this group. And then we see it in the winter with the snow, and then in the summer as we're really doing that push to get schools prepared and reopened. So a lot of the members were either at or right at the comp time limit this year. So we're hoping to, we're actually in a separate agreement, paying that down so that we're starting fresh, and our facilities management team will be able to better manage their comp time, earning it going forward. But we also recognize the need to increase it because so many of our, again, it's a small group, but a large percentage of the area managers were right at that comp limit.
Now, why would someone be receiving comp time in lieu of overtime pay?
So this was an agreement reached with the unit, I believe, in 1987. To be transparent, I don't have the full backstory of why that was the negotiation between, or why that was the agreement with this unit. I know it is something that we did discuss at the table, but they were fairly pleased with the current structure and how it's been implemented, with the change of just increasing it.
Okay. Is the comp time, so the comp time are hours that these workers have worked, are those hours factored into their retirement?
So I'm actually not sure. I'd have to connect with the retirement board to see how that is factored in.
Because those are hours that they worked, they should be factored into their retirement, as far as I'm concerned. So do you think you were able to get me an answer for that question?
Yes, I can certainly connect with the retirement board and see how that's handled, and get back to you this week, I would assume.
Okay. Jim, is that, so the 2%, 2.5, 2%, is that the best percentage that the city of Boston is able to pay these workers based on the financial conditions of the city right now?
Yeah, that's the wage pattern. I think Jeremiah said that's the consistent pattern at BPS for, and it's what the city feels is sort of financially viable going forward.
The only reason I say that is we had the municipal security officers, one of the years they received 1.5, I believe, which was disappointing to me. I was upset about that. But why, how do we not have, why do the municipal security officers have 1.5? Others have higher, and I support this collective bargaining agreement. I think it's fair, but my only point is, why weren't the municipal security officers also given a higher percentage?
Yeah, I think a lot of the first round of contracts were sort of, a look back version of contracts that sort of reflected the resources that were available during that period. We were going through a sort of a pandemic retraction to, resources. I think that was the pattern that was sort of negotiated and agreed to. And there's also differences between different organizations. BPS has a different structure.
Right, no, I understand that, but it doesn't answer the question of why the municipal security officers only had a 1.5% increase, which was disappointing to me. I voted for it, but as you know, Jim, I was disappointed in that. Any language in here about people that are reservists in the military?
So in this, in our latest agreement, there was no, that was not addressed at the table between the parties.
I think my time ran out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Durkin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for being here. I acknowledge that every single collective bargaining agreement is different, and this is my first, series of collective bargaining agreements that I'm reviewing as a new city councilor. So I want to commend the efforts of the administration to get every union worker working for the city underneath a contract. I think that's a great effort. I don't have any specific questions about this, but So I had no experience working with the Plant Administrators Association. How long did collective bargaining agreements take? And given that every year it seems like every year it's a pretty consistent bump, how long do negotiations usually take with this union?
So this group, as you'll see, or as you may see from the summary that we provided, they'd been out of their contract for a little while, but we hadn't actually gotten to the table. I think their council also represents the BTU, represents BASIS. So I guess there wasn't maybe as much urgency. I think we wanted to see some of the bigger unions in the district get settled first, and then kind of feed off the framework from those contracts. So all in all, we were able to reach an agreement fairly quickly. I don't have the exact dates of when we started negotiations to when we completed them. But as I mentioned, this is a group that we have a really strong working relationship with. So we were pretty efficient in our negotiations to reach a deal.
And in terms of prioritization of expired union contracts, could you speak a little more to what those efforts look like and how the administration prioritizes which union contracts to get settled first?
Well, so I think you touched on it. We've made a big effort to try and get all of our units under contract. We were able to do that in the last 2 years at this point. We now have a couple that had expired in August, so we're working with our team to prepare for on our side of the negotiations. We're working with the city on financial authority where we are for a couple of those groups. But in general, I think, and I don't want to speak for our other unions, but I think that they like to see, what's happening with the BTU, and, that kind of sets the bar, I would imagine. Again, I don't want to speak for our bargaining partners here, but I know that that's the sense that we get. But we're interested in making sure that all of our groups are under contract. I know that's really a priority that we've heard both from the mayor and her team, and also Superintendent Skipper has made that a clear priority. But at the same point, we need to make sure that we're working with our unions to negotiate fair contracts for our employees, but also for the students. So, I think it is that balancing act, right, between that priority, but also making sure we're getting a good, strong contract that lets us provide the services to the students that we believe are necessary to improve their learning condition and student outcomes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for those efforts. I think this is really important to get all of our workers that are operating under a contract currently back into a working contract. So commend those efforts, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. I just want to acknowledge that we've been joined by our council colleagues, Councilor Flaherty and Councilor Louis Jen. Councilor Coletta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much for your work as well. I appreciate, again, the thorough questioning from my colleagues. I wanted to zero in on the on-call stipend. It seems hyper-specific, $3,965 to $5,750. I guess what is the reasoning behind that? And then also, is it on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis? Like, what does that actually look like? And I guess what does on-call time look like for these workers, since there's only 16 of them? Are they always doing on-call time? Is it just during the snowstorms like you mentioned and right before school, or is it concentrated in those specific times of the year?
So they have it worked out with our facilities team. The one unit member will be fully on call. I believe it's every 4 weeks it rotates. So, you know, a pipe could burst at 2 in the morning for a building, and they would be one of the first calls you would get, that person who's on call. So that's, and they do like I believe it's 4-week rotations for each of them being on call. So that's what this stipend represents. But then, you know, like you mentioned, a snowstorm, we have to reach out to more than just the one person who's on call, because all of our buildings are now affected. So there's things that happen throughout the district that might require us to reach out more than just like the one designated on-call person at any given time. So this money represents that, and it hadn't been increased in, I believe it was going back like 3 collective bargaining agreements. So what we did in recognizing that, you know, it was time to increase this rate is we looked at the general wage increases for each year and used that as the like measuring stick for how much it should increase. And that's kind of how we got to the exact figure through negotiations. But that was kind of the framework for calculating what we believe to be a reasonable increase for this provision of the contract.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I've had the pleasure of working with some of these folks and solving some of our issues, and it's admirable work. So just thank you to them as well for listening in. And that's it for questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Councilor Louis Jen, any questions for this panel?
Thank you, Councilor Orell. I just wanted to say thank you. And a lot of our city employees have been, you know, with expired contracts, and so thank you for working on these. I know there are still many more to get through. I think my colleagues have asked any question that I have, so you have to make sure that our lowest paid workers are paid and compensated for the work, and all of our workers are compensated justly for the work that they do on behalf of the city. So just wanted to say thank you, and I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Louis Jen. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say it's been a pleasure to work with you, Jim, and Jeremiah over the years. So I know a lot of detail went into this contract, and many of whom are miracle workers, right? They're in antiquated facilities for the most part, and keeping things together with duct tape and strategery, and, you know, just their experience of being able to plug something into something else to get through the school day. So kudos to our plant administrators for the work that they do to keep our buildings open as we continue collectively working together to make those necessary upgrades and changes building by building. So thanks again for the work you've done on behalf of the school children, and I look forward to working with you in some capacity moving forward. Merry Christmas to you and your families, and good to see you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Councilor. Good to see you as well. Merry Christmas as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. I have just a couple questions. Are the plant administrators responsible for snow removal?
So they work in coordinating with our school leaders and our facilities team to get the snow removal, to make sure it happens. You know, I imagine on occasion they might have to pick up a shovel and pitch in. You know, I think that's what's really admirable about our facilities team is that across all units, whether it's custodians, plant administrators, planning and engineering, we really see a really strong partnership there. And I think it says a lot about the work of Brian Ford and PJ Priskenis and John McIntosh of really creating a great unit. So they coordinate more of the resources needed to do the snow removal than doing the physical act. Again, there's only 16 of them across, I don't have the exact number of buildings in the district right now, but there's a lot of them. So they do the administration, the management, the oversight of it.
Awesome. And then do they follow the school holiday calendar, like the same with the teachers, or what?
So, yes, they receive the school holidays that all district employees get, with the understanding that on occasion there's emergencies that they might have to get called in for a day, even when, we're all off celebrating President's Day or MLK Junior Day. They might have to get called in because that's just the nature of their work. But they do get the same paid holidays. They are not off in the summer. They get a vacation accrual that they can take throughout the year. But summer is a really critical time for our facilities team to get our buildings up and ready for the new year.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for all your hard work on reaching this agreement, and thank you for your time here. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're now waiting for BPD to join us. So in the meantime, we'll take a brief recess until BPD enters the chambers. We're in recess. Recess. We'll now move on to dockets number 1812 and 1813. I'm going to read both dockets into the record. Docket number 1812, message in order for your approval in order to reduce the FY24 appropriation for the reserve for collective bargaining by $16,799,444 to provide funding for the Boston Police Department for the FY24 increase contained within the collective bargaining agreements between the City of Boston and the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association. And also docket number 1813, message in order for a supplemental appropriation order for the Boston Police Department for FY24 in the amount of $30,799,444 to cover the FY24 cost items contained within the collective bargaining agreements between the City of Boston and the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association. The terms of the contract are July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2023, and July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2025. The major provisions of the contract include base wages increases of 2%, 1.5%, and 2%, 1%, and 2.5% to be given in July of each year in the contract term, as well as the addition of the Transitional Career Award, I'll say that again, including, as well as the addition of the Transitional Career Award Program in July 2023, now also be referred as TCAP. The contract also contains reforms relating to the disciplined officers' return to duty, the paid detail system, and union release. These matters were sponsored by the administration and referred to the committee on December 6, 2023. Moving forward, I would like to now introduce today's panelists testifying on behalf of the administration with respect to the dockets 1812 and 1813 regarding FY24 increases contained with the collective bargaining agreements between the City of Boston and Boston Police Patrolmen's Association. From the administration today, we have Chief of Commissioner of Boston Police Department, Commissioner Cox. We also have Budget Director of the City of Boston, James Williamson, Senior Advisor of Labor from the Mayor's Office, Lou Mandarini. And we also have, Budget Director of the City of Boston, James Williamson, and then also Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor for Policy and Legal Affairs for the Boston Police Department, Nicole Taub. Want to pass it on to we'll start with opening remarks. If any of my colleagues have opening remarks, want to light up your light? No opening remarks? All right, so we just dive right into it and pass it off to the panel.
Thank you, Chair Worrell and other members of the City Council. Again, I am Jim Williamson, the Budget Director here at the City of Boston. I'm joined with my colleagues at the Police Department and from the Labor team to discuss the union contract with the Boston Police Patrolmen Association and its implications for the city's budget. We really appreciate this shared collaborative effort to safeguard the city's resources while providing resources to the labor workforce. In terms of the dockets before you, docket 1812 takes dollars from the collective bargaining reserves totaling $16,799,440, and then docket 1813 appropriates money to the Boston Police Department's FY24 budget of $30,799,440. And just to recap, we said this at the earlier hearing, but as part of the FY24 budget that was finalized in June 2023, there was $76.2 million included in aggregate for collective bargaining reserves. And since July 1, 2023, the City Council has already passed 5 collective bargaining supplementals drawing on this reserve in amounts that total $28 million for 5 city and 1 BPHC union. And with this additional reduction, the reserve balance will stand at $31.3 million. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues for any other comments.
Good morning, Chair Worrell, President Flynn. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today. I just will do a brief overview of sort of what the city got and what the union got in terms of this deal. But I mostly want to leave opportunity for questions and comments and discussion. So won't go too long on that. So in terms of the process of negotiating this contract, the mayor laid out some markers and remained committed to them throughout the process. And that was to say that she would not negotiate or sign a contract with the police union that didn't contain within it fundamental reform. We're proud to say we think this contract does contain those fundamental reforms, which is why we reached the agreement. So the areas of fundamental reform that we laid out in terms of what we were pursuing were discipline reform, reform of the MIS system, that is getting officers back to duty, reform of the detail system, the paid detail system, and reform of union release. So that is when the city pays for officers to engage in union business. So in each of those areas, we feel like we obtained meaningful progress. With respect to discipline reform, for the first time since 1994, when the concept of just cause, labor law concept, came into this contract, we have placed the first limitations on the role or the ability of an outside arbitrator to second guess the decisions of the police commissioner with respect to officers who commit serious offenses being removed from the force. So what we obtained is for a list of offenses, if an officer is either indicted or there is a sustained finding by a trial board in BPD, that officer is terminated for these offenses and relinquishes the ability to go to arbitration to get their job back. Without too much editorial comment, I've been in the union movement for a long time, a labor lawyer for a long time. I'm not aware of a situation where a union has ever agreed to relinquish arbitration. It's uncommon, to say the very least. And it's a meaningful reform in this contract. With respect to details, we accomplished many things. Our goal in this process of overhauling the paid detail system was to make the detail system work. So it was a much more far-reaching project than pieces here and there. But in terms of the reforms, what we obtained in this is introducing for the first time ever the concept of prioritization in details. So that is to say, ensuring that the details we need covered are the ones that are covered first. So the way the system works now is that it's all by choice of the various officers. And so, the North Washington Street Bridge in the morning in Charlestown or the garage on the corner of Boylston Street, oftentimes those details aren't covered. And so they either go uncovered or we have to cover them on mandatory overtime. Introducing the concept of prioritization guarantees that those details, events for large events, that is to say events of 5,000 or more, so Fenway Park, TD Bank, North Garden, that these details are covered first. And that all other details are second order. We also have a reform in the detail system of how details are handed out. Right now, we have a system where detail assignments are handed out on paper. We have some 20 officers who mostly do that. We've won the ability to civilianize that work and introduce technology, so an app that can flow through the process of handing out details. With respect to sources of labor that can perform details, this is another advancement. Prior to the ratification of this contract, the paid detail system was closed entirely to sworn officers. We now have other sources of labor that can perform paid details when they receive the training to do that. So we have BHA police, we have our MPPA, City Hall security guards who can perform details. We have college and university police, and we have we have individuals who are employed and trained by a civilian contractor. And then we also, in the detail reform process, end the practice of being able to pick up another detail while you're being paid for a first detail. That's a concept called roll-up. So that's a practice that we end. With respect to the other two goals that we set out for these negotiations, reform of MIS, that is to say getting officers back to work, if they're able to get back to work on light duty. Right now, it's a practice where that, if there's a conflict between the department's doctor in occupational health and the patrol officer's doctor, that goes to an arbitrator right now, the question of going back to light duty. That's frankly kind of a wasteful process because it takes a long time to book an arbitrator. The arbitrator mostly listens to medical evidence, medical testimony, and then the arbitrator takes several days to write a decision. We are switching to an IME, which is much more in conformance with how the workers' comp system makes. It's a medical decision, it should be made by medical professionals. And then the final piece, with respect to union release, we put, the first limits on how many folks will pay to go to a union meeting, and we also get back a couple of jobs that are largely, take a lot of time during the day that the union is relinquishing with respect to one of their labor management committees. In terms of the union side, as Jim had alluded to, we have cost of living adjustments dating back to 2020 that are 2%, 1.5%, 2%, and then 1 and 2.5. And we introduced a program called TCAP. This is something that has existed with other unions for some time, but it is a form of a longevity bonus. And these, the TCAP is, as you will hear when we testify, designed to tackle a very specific problem, which is that we lose a lot of patrol officers to the fire department or to suburban departments. TCAP is designed to have a laser-like focus on stopping that trend. And then in terms of other benefits that the union gets, we have raised the detail rate to ensure that the details we need covered are covered. The union now has enshrined in the contract Juneteenth as a holiday, and we also expand degrees and educational institutions that qualify for the department's educational incentive program. We've added Northeastern, Boston University, and the UMass system, and we've added the degrees of sociology, psychology, and public administration. I think with that, I would wrap up and leave whatever time for question and discussions.
Thank you.
So, happy holidays, everyone. I haven't seen you in a while.
Happy holidays.
And so I just want to, certainly elaborate and build on this contract is filled with quite a few reforms that were talked about. But specifically, they absolutely have an impact on the efficiency and the priority of resources that we use in the police department. And I'll elaborate a little bit more by saying that, the prioritization of details is very important in the sense that we now, by having priority 1 and priority 2, we make sure that all the public safety, high-profile details are filled first and foremost. And it's almost guaranteed that they will be across the board before anything else is done. Secondly, by adding additional folks to the list, we almost guarantee that we might get to fill in 100% of these public safety details in general, which will have an impact, a multiplier impact on maybe the public safety in the whole city. Just the presence of more officers everywhere throughout, just doing details for the most part. Presence means something. And the fact is that this actually gives us the ability to prioritize the most high profile, making sure it's done, include others where we're almost making sure that public safety in the city is going to increase. He made mention of the incentive, the TCAP. Well, the TCAP in some way, shapes, and forms helps us with retention and attraction of police officers. We're having a hard, difficult time both attracting officers to come on board and keeping officers on board. There's other public safety partners, like the fire department has a similar, condition in their contract, and we have been losing people actually to the fire department this should hopefully stem the tide for that, and that'll help us be able to attract, officers to come to Boston here to make sure that our positions are filled appropriately. And then, of course, the biggest reform is about certainly the arbitration. I have been doing this for a while, and I don't know of any, and it could be, but I don't know of any police department in the country that has gotten their officers who currently have arbitration in their contract to actually relinquish it around offenses, any offense, never mind the list of ones we have here. So, the combination of multiple things in this contract, there's a ton of reform, but a lot of them that go to the efficiency of it. You hear us talk a little bit about the medical leave and being able to get that third doctor in. Prior to this contract, I think we had over, almost 10% of our patrol force was out injured for over a year. Getting them back took a process. We had to get other folks involved. We had to go through arbitration to do that. We no longer have to do that. With this contract in place, we can get a third-party doctor to come in, and if there's a difference between the officer's physician and our physician, to rectify that, to help either person get back or for us to allow them to continue on being out. The union time, the release of that, again, putting more officers back on the street that currently aren't out there. Way more efficient, effective use of officers' time. Officers no longer in the detail room because now we're going to surveillance it and also bring some technology involved. Again, getting more officers back out onto the street. So this contract, runs the gamut as far as reform is concerned, but I particularly want to highlight the fact that it helps us be a much more effective and efficient police department. And so if you have questions more about the details or some of the things I said, Nicole Katab could actually fill in some of the gap of some of the numbers-wise if you have around that. But I'll be here for a little while, so thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the whole panel for all your hard work on coming to an agreement and bringing forward some landmark reforms here to the city of Boston. Just to lay the ground rules for my colleagues, we'll all get a round of questions. We'll also go to a second round, but we'll start off everyone with 5 minutes worth of questions, and then when your time's up, you'll hear the alarm go off. I'll start it off, and then we'll go in order of arrival. I also want to acknowledge that we have been joined by our council colleague, Council Braden. The contract mentioned reforms to the paid detail system. These reforms are decades in the making and were specifically called for in the 2015 BPD audit. The 2015 audit also called for an automated assignment system, which it sounds like we're heading towards in cooperation with the city's Department of Innovation and Technology. So my question is, who will be responsible for creating and implementing these systems, and do you foresee involving DoIT in this process?
Certainly the police department will be, and as always, we partner with all city government partners in making sure that we get the most effective and efficient technology that's out there. So that's sufficiently answered. So Boston Police will be responsible for attracting that, but we will certainly seek out the assistance from DoIT.
Awesome. Yeah, because I know you guys, BPD also has their own technology department. So just want to make sure that we're collaborating and using all resources that we have here in the city of Boston.
Yes.
I guess my second question is, how is the independent medical examiner agreed upon, and how is this different from the current process with the BPD's doctor?
Certainly. So the current practice, when the department's physician does an evaluation of an officer that's out injured, and that evaluation, there's a disagreement between the officer's physician and the department's physician. Under the contract, the department would have the authority to identify a third independent medical examiner that officer would have to go see for an evaluation about his or her fitness to return for light duty. And the determination of that third physician, determined by the doctor, would be binding as to whether or not the officer would return to work. Currently, that determination is left to an arbitrator who, as was previously mentioned, is tasked with evaluating medical records when they're not a medical professional, and that process could also take a significant period of time between scheduling a hearing and waiting for a determination that would only further delay the officer's return to work.
So is it the Boston Police Department that picks the medical examiner, or
That's correct. Under the contract, the department would select the physician.
And then my third question is, the addition to the TCAP, can you explain the objective is for retention, but can you give us a breakdown of the current numbers of officers that are eligible at each bonus level to understand how TCAP will grow over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so you're looking for a breakdown of how many officers have been on 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Right.
So I personally don't know that offhand. Do you have that?
I do not, but
I don't, but I do have a statistic about 980 of the sworn force, or about 2/3 of them are in one of those bands.
All right.
Yeah.
Would you guys be able to break that down for me and submit it?
Okay.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Council Flynn for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When these paid details are, when Boston Police are not able to fill them and others are filling them, such as colleges, universities, and others, that's also taking police officers off the street. And the police officers on the street that are doing details have made a significant amount of arrests, including serious arrests for significant crimes. What will happen when a public safety professional is at a detail and is not a Boston Police? What type of arrest powers will they have?
I can answer that. I think we are, insofar as possible, and this is part of the reason why we're going with the route of a civilian contractor that can train officers, trying to cover as many of the things that an officer can do at a traffic detail with these other sources of labor. So I think we envision a world in which that civilian contractor can train everybody in suspicious indicators and basic first aid and how to actually do traffic details. But I think the answer to your question directly is we're not envisioning arrest powers for those folks that.
I'm under the impression, just based on my research, 300 police officers at a time are on the streets doing details, and if those officers are not on the street, that's a significant number of police officers that are not out there protecting the public. We have people that may not be able to make arrests. We're contracting this out. Does this mean there's a reduction of Boston police officers on the street when this is implemented?
So I'll answer that. The answer is no, in a sense that all we're doing is prioritizing any officer that wants to do a detail. We're just prioritizing which details they can do. So, Boston police officers have, first dibs at all the details in general. What this does do is include officers that are all post-certified, post-trained police officers to the mix in the city of Boston in doing details. The details around, their powers outside of the detail area. I'll have to, get back to you a little bit more on that, just to, to see how we're going to go about doing that concerning arrest powers. But for the most part, details are around public safety, particularly, around construction, things of that nature, to make sure the public, don't hurt, construction workers or other people in general. And so it's really there for prevention, right? That's the purpose of it. So I don't envision a lack of public safety out there. As a matter of fact, I see far more than what we're already filling, to be honest with you. And mostly all post-certified police officers until we get to the point where we can actually, add, more civilian-based folks there around, what we made mention to about training civilians to continue to do this. If we have more details, then we have people to do it, and that's maybe currently the case coming up. The addition of more people in the mix is a good thing, I think, for the city across the board. I don't see less public safety in this whatsoever. Absolutely more.
I'm going to support this contract. I am troubled about the reduction of, in my opinion, of police officers not filling these critical details. They play a critical role while they're doing details. They make significant arrests. My final question, I know my time might be up shortly. Going to an arbitration as it relates to a medical issue, or a third party, I should say, if the police officer's medical team is from the Veterans Administration Medical Center, certainly you would not need to have someone, an outside person or outside medical team, review that situation, would you?
Are we talking a medical response?
No,
EMS,
I'm saying if there was a discrepancy between the police doctor and the police officer's doctor, and the police officer's doctor was from the VA Medical Center, do we need to go to a third party at that time?
I don't think it's about the credibility of the doctor. It's really about, trying to get the person back to work, and I would imagine physicians differ, but they're all competently trained. And so the third party is really to help us get over that. One of the things I know, certainly studies, that officers being out is not a good thing. Physically, if they can't do something, that's one thing. But just the mere fact that they're not actively at work, engaged with other people, around other people, sometimes bad things tend to happen. So we're trying to make sure we get officers back to work for their wellness, and certainly to help us be able to function in general. But I think there's many, many studies out there that people being off of work is just not a good thing for their mental health or anything about that. So then that's what we're trying to do, again, making sure we're efficient and effective about that, because it's important that we get them back to work and for their wellness as well.
I guess my point on that, Commissioner, is if a police officer is engaged in the VA medical system, following his or her return from active duty in the military, the VA Medical Center plays a critical role in providing that officer medical care coverage from head to toe. I would not want to see that disrupted, where the police officer would have to go see another medical provider. I guess that's my point. Would that?
No.
That would not be the case, right?
We're not making them see another provider. This is for the purposes to determine if they can come back to work. They can absolutely always see their own provider at any time, as much as they want, as often as they want. That's what their insurance is for and things of that nature. We work with the VA in all hospitals in general, and I think, particularly vets and things of that nature, we have their welfare in common around that. This just becomes like we're just making sure that we get people who are able to come back to work a little faster, with a much more efficient process. Because currently, the way it is now, waiting for arbitration, waiting for the things that happen like that, it just takes a very, very long period of time. And this is very much not only about the efficiency of our department, but also about the well-being of the officers in general, because people being out just tends to not be good for their mental health or their wellness overall in general.
Is there any language in this new contract that assists police officers that are veterans?
Assist them as veterans. So, as you know, veterans have a whole host of, benefits, certainly through the VA and other governmental agencies. And then they have, the whole variety of benefits, through insurance that the city provides in general, depending on the insurance coverage. As well as we have some other things, whether it's through our, wellness program that we have in the police department, depending on the services they're looking for that are out there. As well as in the state of Massachusetts, there's multiple coverages out there for people that are even uninsured. So I think the officers that are on our job have a whole host of possibilities as far as coverage is concerned, for medical is concerned. I'm not aware of people that don't have coverage, and I could be mistaken, but...
Sometimes...
Thank you, Council President.
Okay, can I just finish?
All right.
Just sometimes...
One last question.
Okay, well, I'll make a brief statement. Sometimes there are issues as it relates to retirement days or retirement time. A veteran, if they're serving on active duty, how does that impact their time as a police officer? I don't necessarily need an answer now, but I want to make sure that those police officers that are in the reserves or on active duty, activated for active duty, their retirement is credited. They're respected as veterans so that that time can move forward. I just don't want to see any people challenging any veterans as it relates to retirement benefits. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council President. Council Murphy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the BPPA for your hard work to get us here. As we know, the police department is woefully understaffed. You deal with that every day. So there's a few things that you've already touched on, but just kind of have follow-up questions on them. Like overall, do you feel that this contract is going to help recruitment and that we'll see more police officers come to this profession? Something I know Council President Flynn advocates for all the time. We need a couple hundred every year, not just a small class, hopefully once a year. So
I'd like to think hopefully it will certainly help, certainly financially. The benefits are there, as well as, particularly the T-cap and the incentives financially for them to come on the job. But there's other factors out there that may be impacting people coming on our job, and we're working on those as well.
okay.
Can I also just take the opportunity, since you asked, to remind folks that the time period to sign up to take the civil service exam is currently open until January 15th for anybody interested in joining the BPD, which hopefully will include all of the great benefits that we're talking about here today.
Good plug. We had a plug yesterday from someone too from the police department. So the arbitration, I mean, when we're the only one, it just makes me wonder why, and make sure that we are protecting. The list of offenses obviously are unquestionable, should never have a police officer if any of these things are true. But when you talked about the leave and getting police officers back to work, how many officers are we talking about? Right?
So I know the one statistic out there, and I don't know where we are currently. So we currently have 172 officers that are out, injured. And 138 of those are police officers.
138, and how many police officers do we have right now?
Total number?
Total number of sworn is approximately 2,100, and that includes those that are currently out injured.
Right, of that, the 138 are out, but they're part of the 2,100. Okay, and on the detail part, how many details on average per day do you need to fill?
So I don't have the numbers broken down by day, but just to give you an idea, by year, in 2022, there were over 112,000 construction details and over 28,000 non-construction details that we were looking to fill.
How many of those were filled?
So in total of the 141,609 details in 2022, we had about just under half of them went filled, 37% went unassigned, and 14% were canceled.
Okay. And with this new system, we prioritize police officers first, but we already know most of them don't get filled, so we're going to go through the list of those who want or are able to take a detail. And is the hope that every single one of these does get filled, that we are able to fill them? Because that will be a lot for this person who will get the contract to fill with civilian flaggers.
So the goal is to, we prioritize the details. That was a big list, but that doesn't mean all of those will be priority ones. And so the goal is to make sure that the ones that need the most public safety get public safety, period. And then the remainder that aren't as high profile or maybe it's not the need as much around that, then that's when we will start to
And when you say prioritize, because obviously I totally understand like which areas the mayor and we want, right? We want the garden, we want the bridge, we mentioned the ones that matter the most, but prioritize just to be filled by anyone, or prioritize
No.
that those will be filled by sworn police officers?
Sworn, so it's only two categories, priority 1 and priority 2. I mean, that's how we're putting it in the list. And the priority 1s are the most high profile, the largest ones, events of 5,000 or more, these large venues and these major construction things throughout the city on major thoroughways. And so, that is what we're trying to make sure that, the most high profile, make sure that we have officers at those, as opposed to, as it is right now, the officers choose. They get called, they can pick any detail that they want.
Right, now they're gonna have to choose, priority 1 first if they want.
Well,
Okay.
yes, they will
Yeah.
have to fill one, and then
The-
if those are all filled, then we'll get the
Then
priority.
we can get hit.
Correct.
Okay. And on the,
Counselor, can I just add one thing to answer your question? With respect to traffic control, type 1s and type 2s can actually be done by all the sources of labor if they're uncovered. So after we go through the hierarchy of people who can do this, the traffic control can be done by all of the available sources of labor in the contract. So not nightclubs, bars, liquor stores, banks,
those aren't, yeah. Okay. And what percentage are not traffic? I would think most are, but what is the percentage that then could be filled by?
I don't have the breakdown traffic, non-traffic.
But bars and like those could all be
We can
filled
get that
by
answer for you. We can get the breakdown, but it's
Please, yeah.
overwhelmingly traffic.
Okay. And last thing for now is, there was a department that gave out details. There were police officers who've worked there for years, and now we're dissolving their department, like we're going to a different system to assign. What is happening to those individual people? Like, where are they going to be reassigned?
Well, they're in part of the police department. They'll
course,
just
yeah.
be assigned some other location within the police department. We're a big organization, so we have plenty of homes for them to go to.
Right, I'm just thinking like 20-something years, and if your classroom gets dissolved or your school gets shut, it's really hard for teachers, right, to like, then where do you go? So have there been conversations with those individual officers who now have to go find a different?
No, not yet, but, people sign up on our job for a long period of time, and so it is certainly not unheard of for units to be dissolved or people to be transferred at some point in their career. And, we're mindful of that when people are transferred. So, we will certainly help them transition back into the police department, but they're all police officers, so.
No, yeah, I know,
So-
yeah, I know a lot of them, yeah, so I definitely know, yeah.
I also would note, Councilor Murphy, that we typically accommodate needs, and that is specifically written into the agreement that officers performing these functions with 25 years of service or more will be accommodated on a case-by-case basis in a way that meets both the department's operational needs and their individual needs.
No, that makes me feel better. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. And just to ask another question around detail, do we know when the detail system will be up and running? Like, do we have a timeline?
So we're currently in the process of evaluating potential vendors. There are several companies out there that perform this function, and at the same time recognizing that there will be impacts potentially on other members of the sworn workforce. We're in the process of continuing negotiations with them as well, and once that all wraps up, we'll begin a rollout of the new technology-based system.
Awesome. But do we have a goal that we want to have it implemented by?
Well, I can say on behalf of the administration, we want it implemented as soon as possible.
Yes.
There's a lot to do. So, I think, as I've explained it to people, we're at the stage right now of the goal was to end the monopoly on who could perform details. How to build the system, how long it's going to take to build the system is something that we honestly don't have an answer to, but it's our intention to put the speed on to get it in place as soon as we can.
Thank you. Councilor Durkin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the administration panel for being here. I really appreciate the intention of this contract, and I appreciate, as I said earlier in this hearing, the focus on getting all government workers that work underneath a union contract is commendable. So I thank the administration for, I know how much work and effort goes into this, and a little bit of the, in the recap, knowing how many meetings had to take place for this to happen is important. So Lou, can you speak a little more to the process of how this came to be and how long this arbitration period was?
Sure. This contract started getting negotiated 2 mayoral administrations ago, because it expired in June of 2020. So some amount of negotiation had taken place then. I've never gotten a totally accurate estimate on how much, but I think it was several sessions. We had, in earnest, I think we began in about February, March of 2022. We had somewhere in the order of 10, 11 sessions directly with the union. We had a couple of mediation sessions with the Joint Labor Management Committee. That's the state agency that settles contract disputes in the public safety service. And then, innumerable opportunities to sort of talk and work this out in smaller group settings. So I can't give you a firm number other than to say it's a lot. It took an enormous amount of effort over a very long time to get where we got.
So from the contract, obviously there's medical leave reform, detail reform, discipline reform, and increases in compensation. Obviously, as a city council, our efforts are really around what are the intended consequences and how are we making sure that these reforms are real and meaningful and not just words in a contract, and also making sure that there aren't unintended consequences of some of the language here. So obviously I'm someone who cares a lot about union representation and having workers who operate under a contract. And I just want to voice my my concern or around the detail reform piece of this, and ensuring that we have that it doesn't have an unintended consequence of privatization of government. But I see that within, and Lou, so if you could speak a little more to that, but I can see that there are multiple layers of this and making sure that retirees and other folks, but I just want to make sure that we're not going to be in the business of hiring private vendors to end up meeting some of the needs. Although in my district, on-field details are a really important thing to rectify.
Well, I think the fair answer to your question is that we set out to do a lot in the reform of the detail system here, but I think the animating principle of what we try to do is actually to make the detail system work. It wasn't about just creating opportunities for jobs, although we did that. It wasn't just about increasing the supply of labor, although we did that. It wasn't just about prioritization, although we did that. It wasn't just about civilianizing sort of routine work that should be done not by sworn officers, although we did that. And it wasn't just about ending wasteful practices like roll-ups, although we did that too. I think to your point, to get our conclusion with respect to the private vendor question is that the quickest way to be able to stand up this system is going to have a private vendor that does the training of the non-sworn people. I mean, if we want to actually operationalize this, I think, and I don't want to speak, for the department, but our conclusion was that's the quickest way to get people into the system. So our MPPA, City Hall security guards who can do this now, BHA police, the civilian contractors, the college and university police, they have to be trained. I mean, The point of opening up the system is that they can do all the things that a sworn officer could do on a detail. They have to be trained to be able to do that. That obviously carries an enormous amount of liability for the city should something happen. I mean, if we're going to put these people in the detail system, they have to function in the detail system. And so our conclusion was the quickest way to do that, probably the most effective way to do that, without taxing, BPD to be training people other than sworn officers, was through that contract model. So that's our best judgment on how to actually do this, and that's what we agreed to.
That's a really helpful explanation. Thank you so much. Obviously, this is something that I ask in every single hearing because I believe that when we have union workers who are able to do a job, we obviously want to prefer them over any other worker that could possibly do a job. So that was a really helpful explanation. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the medical leave component of, obviously, I've shared that mental health is a focus of mine on the city council, and want to make sure that in all conversations with doctors that it's not, and I know that I think this component of having an independent medical examiner is a really helpful component, but just making sure to voice my support for making sure that all types of illness are included, specifically for officers. My sister was a police officer actually in Auburn, Alabama for 3 years, and knowing the mental health components of what it takes to be an officer in any municipality, I just want to make sure to voice my support and just to make sure that mental health is at the forefront of what we provide to our officers.
Yeah, no, it is. It is in general, and I thank your sister for her service, as a matter of fact. But no, mental health is a big component to it, as well as their physical health in general. We care a great deal about the officers. They do a very difficult job, and we have to be cognizant of all the ways in which they can be injured or hurt, and we do. I mean, this is not, we're not trying to make someone come back when they're not ready and able to serve the public. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to incentivize and certainly get officers back that are capable of coming back, but they might not just, there might be a difference of opinion on full capacity of what they can do, and that happens from time to time. But the reality is we are very aware and cognizant of that we need to have officers that are fit in every shape of the word to serve the public before they come back, and that's what we're going to make happen.
And can you speak a little more to the increases in compensation, specifically how we're competing with other municipalities in our nearby areas, and also maybe how we're compared to New York?
Yeah, New York is a total different beast. I'm quite confident we make far more in New York, but the conditions in New York are different. The officers retire a lot faster in New York. I think that in 20 years their retirement, and so do we have a choice? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to talk a little bit about what our attrition rates have looked like over the last few years, from 2018 to October of 2023, we lost 39 officers in total to the fire department, 24 of them in 2022 alone. We also, in the last 2 years, lost approximately 8 officers to other municipalities, most of them significantly smaller than ours. And a lot of the personnel that we've lost in this time are probationary officers, meaning they were within their first year of coming out of the police academy. So So we've certainly seen significant attrition over the last several years that we've been unable to keep pace with in the hiring process.
Thank you, and I know I'm over time, but I just wanted to say, having it gone to the police cadet graduation, it was really nice. I attended and didn't realize, obviously it was the biggest class this year, and didn't realize that I would actually recognize some of the faces of the folks who were graduating. So not to, but it's really helpful to know that people that I've met in community are people that are being hired by the police department. I think that's a really helpful, at least anecdote for me, to know that people that I've seen out here doing community work are now the people who are being hired. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. Councilor Lara, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations to all of you for ratifying this contract. It has been a long road, one that I have been a very small part of, but I'm very grateful, Lou, for all of your work, Commissioner, and to President Calderon, who's here with us. There's a lot of forward movement here that I'm really hopeful about. And I have questions about some of that forward movement. I'm just going to run down through the parts of the contract that I have questions about. Can you talk a little bit more about the Transitional Careers Award programs? I think that there are specific amounts for the increases, but I don't know that I understand clearly what this program is. And that's just, excuse my ignorance.
We actually have a special guest who's joining us to talk about the intricacies of GAP, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ellen Hatch. I'm the Deputy Chief of Finance. And your question is, what is it for, or how does it work? What's
the Transitional Careers Award Program. So here in the actual MOA, it outlines per year, 2025, 10, 15, the specific amount.
Right.
But I don't know that I understand what the Transitional Career Awards Program is specifically and what those numbers are actually referencing.
Okay, so generally speaking, it's intended to be an incentive for folks to stay at different levels, later into their careers to incentivize more experience. In terms of the amounts, those are amounts that came from the last fire contract. TCAP is something that's in the fire contract, and so and then TCAP grows every time there's a general wage increase based on a formula that is put into the contract that is the same as it is for the fire department.
So they're pay increases based on how length of time in the...
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
Yep.
I'm going to move on to, that was just my question, just my general understanding. I'm going to move on to discipline reform. Again, congratulations. Having a list of things that are ineligible for arbitration, I think, is going to increase how we're able to hold officers accountable here in the city of Boston, but also making sure that we're, weeding out all those perpetual bad apples that we're always talking about. I do have a question. And maybe Lou can answer this question about what the process was for creating this list.
Well, I think, we started out with particular cases in mind that, represented to us the kind of things that this administration would never want to tolerate with respect to officers being on the job. The emblematic one was obviously Patrick Rose. It's a case that happened some decades ago, but it's not a state of affairs that this administration is willing to tolerate. I mean, we've obviously done a lot of analysis of that and have released some public records. But, there are other cases throughout, the last decade, maybe a little bit longer, of cases where officers, and it wasn't just getting their job back through arbitration, but, there would be an officer that would get, lengthy discipline for an offense that clearly should have been terminable. So there's a case of an officer who's actually not in this union, but Clifton McHale was a case that was written about a lot by the Globe. There's a case of a Baltazar DeRosa, accessory to murder back 10, 12 years ago. It's a case that animated us. And are there other, I don't want to take the floor, but I think there are probably other ones that BPD had in mind too that we can supply with you. But that was the animating principle for how we started this list.
I guess I would just add that, this is looking globally at what this reform does, is it reaffirms that it is the police commissioner and the police commissioner alone who should have the ability to determine who is suitable to do the work of a Boston police officer. And by carving these offenses and any indictments out of the universe that is subject to review by an arbitrator, just reaffirms that authority for the commissioner. And we can talk about individual cases, but the reality is, I think one of those cases is frankly too many. And we strive to have only the best serving the city as on behalf of the Boston Police Department, and this is a step forward in ensuring that that is certainly the case.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. So the Boston City Council as a body is very much concerned and interested in protecting Women Against Domestic Violence. President Flynn sat here on the City Council a couple of weeks ago to create a council committee that would be focused on that issue specifically, and a lot of my council colleagues really stood in support of that premise. And so this is really leading into my question that we have assault and battery to collect alone on this list, but domestic assault and battery is not on this list. Why?
Well, Counselor, I can say that, I mean, this sort of goes to the heart of how, collective bargaining works. I mean, let me say, as a general principle, the fact that something is not on this list does not mean we approve of it.
Of course not, but it does mean that it's still up for arbitration, and so.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, the nature of collective bargaining is that you negotiate an agreement with a labor organization, and it's not unlike legislating. It's not unlike what you do, where you have to take it in piece by piece, and you get the most you can, and that at a certain point you have to conclude, this is as good as we're going to do. So
does that mean that the administration?
But hang on. Let me just finish. I think, were we writing this list as one party, this certainly would not only be the only list of offenses that we would agree to. I mean, this would go much further. But I think the point of this is that this is enshrining a principle that there are offenses for which an arbitrator should no longer be working for the BPD, and the police commissioner's decision should not be second-guessed by an outside arbitrator.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mandarini. So my question still stands. I have no question whether or not that was an offense, what action the commissioner would take. There's no question what action the Boston Police Department would take in this instance. But based on your response, are you saying that the administration tried to include assault and battery, domestic assault and battery in this list, and it was negotiated out?
Counselor, I'm not going to get into the back and forth of collective bargaining negotiations and what we tried to do and what we were unsuccessful in doing. Suffice to say, this is a list that represents what we in our judgment believed was the most we could get at this time.
So the Boston
We're
Police-
establishing that principle, and we fully intend to pursue reform in every collective bargaining session we have as long as we are here.
Thank you, Mr. Mandarini.
And that includes including other offenses in this list should we decide to do that.
Great. So that means that the Boston Police Department, the mayor's office, and the BPPA could not come to an agreement about whether or not to include domestic assault and battery on this list, which I can appreciate. I just think that we have to be plain about what we're talking about here. That doesn't mean that the administration agrees with it or that the commissioner is going to take an action, but I would love information about how many Boston police officers have been charged with assault and battery, domestic assault and battery, whether or not there have been internal investigations, criminal investigations, and whether or not they've been rehired. This is an issue it's prevalent all across the country, and it's something that's very, very important. And so I don't mean to be a stickler about it, but I think that we just went, we've had this historical moment here in this contract where we have a list, and I think it's a missed opportunity to not include that on there, and I would like to know why. Chair, how much time do I have?
A minute.
A minute, thank you so much. I'm gonna start with my questions. Medical leave, congratulations, I have no questions on it. I think it's great. It's very much, again, forward movement. I'm gonna start with my questions on detail reform and then move on to the second round because I have a lot of them. This is obviously something that my office has been working on for the last 2 years. And so my first question is about the detail system, particularly around type 1 and type 2 details. Mr. Mandarini, you mentioned that there was a change in pay structure for the details. Was that for both, there was an increase for both type 1 and type 2?
There was. So with respect to type 2 details, there was an agreement that we reached outside of this. It's not in front of you today. Mm-hmm. It's a memorandum of agreement with respect to central booking that raised the detail rate overall from $46 to $60. And then 60. The type 1 detail now was increased also. So it is the highest overtime rate of a patrol officer. So that was a change to this too. So we never had prioritization. There was no such thing as a type 1 and a type 2. So
what's the rate for type 1?
The highest overtime rate of a patrol officer.
Which is?
Right now it's 68.
Got it. So it's just 60 and 68.
Right now, yes.
Okay. And thank you, Councilor Worrell. I will leave my questions for my next round, and thank you all.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all so much again. Congratulations. I know that this took a very long time, and I'm pleased to know that the contract was settled at the table through good faith bargaining and months of negotiations. I'm going to split my questions up into education benefits. I have more questions about the TCAP program, pay raise for the younger police officers under 5 years, and then a few other random points. So I think just in general, I'm very pleased to see the relinquishing of arbitration rights. I think that that's excellent, so congratulations on that. Folks who have had conversations with me before, including the Patrolmen's Association, know that I'm very pleased to see the overhaul of a detail system. I found myself extremely frustrated in District 1, East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End with the level of utility work that has happened on arterial or high-use streets. And there hasn't been any detail to keep folks safe, keep pedestrians safe. Although you walk by a residential street that is closed and there is a police officer standing there. And after calls to the police captain, he has told me that it's in the contract. They can choose whatever they want to. And so I really appreciate the tiering of these details. So thank you for that. I think my only question with that is the prioritization of who gets first choice. Is that linked to any amount of years in the force at all? If I'm a new police officer who's just graduated the academy, do the folks who have been involved in the force for 20 years get first priority of what they choose, or could they also get access to the Tier 1 details?
I believe it goes by lowest available hours. It's an hour system. It's tiered in that way. So the people who work the most go to the bottom of the list. The people who work the least at the top. And then as you work, you accumulate hours, and that's how they're assigned.
Okay. And is that the current system?
Yes.
Okay, so we're keeping the current system as it relates to that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The education benefits as well, the TCAP program, I find really interesting. I know that specific colleges and schools were selected for the education benefits. My concern is around the folks who already have a bachelor's and master's degree, who have come to the force already prepared, and who have already paid or have a lot of student loans without having to go back. So, you know, the police personnel, somebody who has already attended a four-year university and isn't getting recognized for it, I think that's a huge concern of mine. I'm curious to know why these particular schools, and if there was any conversation around including folks who have already gotten their bachelor's or master's degree in criminal justice, in sociology, in public administration. I guess, what would that have cost for us to do that?
And so, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I can address that. I mean, these three schools are, is the product of negotiation, and the majors were the product of negotiation. So this is what we were willing to do in this contract, and this is what we agreed upon for the expansion of this benefit. I mean, I could dress it up to be something else, but this is what we agreed on. I think it's the fair answer to your question. So we are, the function of the educational incentive, I think we can explain that in greater detail, but can we give you a response to that in writing? Is that?
I mean, we're here now. I would love a response now, if that's okay.
I mean, it doesn't function as a tuition reimbursement. It functions as a percentage financial benefit. So anybody that has earned any of the qualifying degrees from any of the qualifying universities will be eligible for that financial incentive. Nobody is currently eligible for the full tuition reimbursement.
So if I had gotten a criminal justice degree from a four-year university, that is not on this list. I do not qualify for that incentive unless I get a master's, right?
I think this is an expansion.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah, no.
This is not
I mean, the way it worked for a very long time was that there was a fixed set of schools under the original Quinn bill that was promulgated in 1972. And then when the state legislature phased that out, BPD adopted its own version of an educational incentive. So it continues to honor those schools and those majors that exist on the original Quinn list. And now this is actually the first expansion we've done of majors and schools since then. So if you have a degree from a qualifying institution, you continue to have that. But there are a lot of schools that aren't on that list because we're still dealing a lot with what the original, the original qualifying schools. So this is an expansion of it, and yes, I mean, I think the fair answer to your question is there are a lot of schools that aren't on it.
Yeah, and I just inherently, I don't think that that's fair. Somebody who has gotten a bachelor's degree from a four-year accredited university in criminal justice, might not be able to, or might not want to go back to school to get those student loans or to have those student loans in their name. And I think expanding the list is certainly something that I would like to see moving forward. Did you say that it's promulgated by the Quinn bill?
Well, the original list of qualifying schools, now that was carried forward, and there's a new program that BPD started when that was phased out. So yes, that was carried forward.
Okay, thank you. And then the pay raise for younger police officers. So anybody under 5 years, they get a 1% raise, is that correct?
Yes, the cost of living adjustments are across the board.
Okay. And it's 1% for those folks. How many folks in the police force are under 5 years right now?
So everybody would get the benefit of the cost of living adjustment, and then in addition to those percentages that are laid out in the agreement, officers at 5, 10, 20, and 25 years would also get the TCAP benefit and any other contractual benefits they're afforded by the contract.
Okay.
And the detail increases.
So folks who have graduated from the academy under 5 years, they don't have to work extra shifts or details to make up for that lack of cost of living adjustment?
No, so they have their base salary, and then at the 5-year mark, they get another increase. It's a longevity, so it's an incentive to stay in the department. The longer you stay, the more your salary is increased. So the incentive is to stay until the next, interval, pay interval, and then you get a boost as a result of staying, and that's how that works.
And Nicole, I'm so sorry I missed earlier when you said the amount of folks who have left the police department under 5 years. What was that number?
I have the list with the dates, and it looks like going back to 2018, going to the fire department, the most senior officer that left was in 2018, and that was a hire date of 2011. So that was someone that left after 7 years. Everybody else left much closer to their departure date. We have several.
So what's the number of the amount of folks that left under 5 years?
So a total of 39 have left since 2018, and I can do the math. I can do the count while we're sitting here just to add up the dates for you.
Okay, thank you so much. And then I know that paternity and maternity leave aren't necessarily in here, but it's something I did want to ask about. Are you folks, and I apologize, Chair, I'll do this quickly. Are you folks subjected to the updated paid parental leave policy that was passed in 2021? And if not, what is it?
We actually agreed to the parental leave in the central booking MOU. So they did get parental leave, just not through this full CBA settlement.
Okay, what's the leave policy? Is it 12 weeks?
It's the current city policy.
Current city policy 2021. It was when it was updated and signed by the mayor at the time.
Yeah, it's the current city policy.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Council Coletta. Council Flaherty, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excited, obviously, that we're closing the gap on the unmanned details. That's something that this council worked extremely hard on years ago in an effort to get Boston Police retirees the opportunity, having been sworn officers, the training, the experience, uniforms if they still fit, but an opportunity for them to stay affiliated, obviously, with the department and the city that they served and loved, and be able to pick up a detail to complement their retirement. So great to hear that that is particularly Type 2, Section E1 will finally become a reality for the men and women of the department who, through no fault of their own, they might have met age, or some may have retired pursuant to sort of the Group 4 formula, but want an opportunity to sort of stay involved and stay engaged. So, and many of whom, frankly, go to other jurisdictions to do just that. They do details in Braintree, Weymouth, other suburban communities. So it's great that we'll have their training and experience, as you had mentioned, Commissioner, just additional eyes and ears on a street corner or in a neighborhood, at a construction detail, et cetera. But the fact that they were now going to finally prioritize the public safety ones first and then be able to backfill working in partnership with transit and sheriff's department, et cetera, is as well as our own City Hall security guards to help them supplement their income. I think that's awesome. Want to just do a little bit of a deeper dive on the TCAP just to help me understand it. So just give a scenario. I'm a police officer that's been on the job for 6 years, patrol officer. I'm in C11, just took the sergeant's test, awaiting results, and you're not going to believe it. I just got a postcard that I've been accepted to become a Boston firefighter, right? Big conundrum. I've got 6 years under my belt as a Boston cop. Got the sergeant's test that I've been studying for, and a postcard drops in my lap, and I'm saying, you know what, I'm going to make a switch. What does the TCAP do to have me think twice about doing that, having had 5 or 6 years on the job? Or it could be I could have a year or two on the job. I just went through the academy, got through my first year probation, and now I'm going to jump to the fire department. And we've seen that we invest a lot of time and money and resources in recruit investigation, the process, the testing, the academies, and then after a year or 2 or 3, we're losing trained officers, and they're just jumping to another city department, which frankly is their right. I've often said that we should have the academy starting at the same time to prevent some of that, but I've heard a couple times this morning that the TCAP may help us in terms of solving that conundrum. So can someone just maybe walk me through how a TCAP would do just that?
Yeah, so I think, there is a reason why we lose as many patrol officers as we do to the fire department, and a TCAP is a large part of it. So that form of a longevity bonus, and I think what we're specifically targeting with that is the officer that is, at the beginning of their career, where they would make a move like that, years 3 to 8, something like that. The TCAP is designed to equalize, I think, for the patrol officer that doesn't work a zillion details and, doesn't have access necessarily to the educational benefits, the sort of straight mainstream officer. One of the reasons we lose so many of folks at the fire department is that gap that exists between those folks and, somebody commensurate, at the beginning of their career with the fire department at that 5-year period. So the granting of the TCAP is designed to close that gap and hopefully keep more officers.
Okay. Happy to see, obviously, on the MIS, the injured leave reform. I happen to think it's something that I've worked closely and fought hard on this council, working obviously with the Wu administration on chiropractic services being added to our formulary, which we just had added, which was a big plus for municipal employees. Goes a long way in literally an officer getting an adjustment and being able to get right back to work, as opposed to having to take time off, primary care, go see a specialist, get on Flexerol. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months goes by, and all that individual needed to do is to go and get an adjustment from a chiropractor. So I think we're going to see great dividends on the fact that we're adding chiropractic services to the formulary for city employees, but also having an eye towards getting injured officers back to work, as opposed to having them languish for months on end at the whim of their doctors and/or a specialist that they're trying to see, and/or physical therapy treatment. So hopefully we'll be able to move that line faster and allow men and women to get back to work quicker. So I don't know if you had any additional thoughts on the injured leave reform in terms of what that will mean when someone's injured on the job and how quickly we could get them back to 100%. That's clearly the most important thing. But I think the role that chiropractic services is going to play, not just for police officers, but for municipal employees, anybody operating heavy equipment or high-risk function jobs will have the ability, I think, to get back to work quickly with that option.
I don't have any additional thoughts on it, but it's something I'm glad to take under advisement.
Okay. And then there was the last part of it, the union release. So if we have the men and women with the BPPA, they have the ability to perform their function on behalf of their members, and then they're able to, there was some, it was a union business relief, something. Can you just explain what that is?
Sure. So the city pays wage replacement, basically for officers to engage in a certain amount of union business. And one of the things that we did, and one of the things that we went after reforming in this contract, was just limiting the number of people who could participate in those union meetings each month, where we pay them for that. So we've cut that number from 54 to 45, which is, it's to be frank, not a huge cost savings, but it's really just a good government reform that we need limits on that, so we place them on. And then there are 2 positions that were essentially full-time related to a joint labor management committee, and we've got 2 of those positions back. So it's just putting limitations on something that frankly had gotten a little out of control.
Okay, very good. Thank you to the commissioner and to Nicole for the great work you guys are doing over the BPD, and obviously to Jim, who's go back a lot of years on budget negotiations, and Lou for the work you're doing in getting all these union contracts resolved and settled in short order, which is, I think, welcome from this body as well as the citizens and the employees. So best of luck moving forward. It's been a pleasure working with all of you in a different variety of different capacities, but mainly as your at-large city council. So look forward to continue to work together to make our city the best and the safest city in the country. And thank you all for your time and attention. Enjoy the holidays, and Happy New Year to all of you.
Thanks so much, Council.
Thank you, Council Flaherty. Council Louis Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Worrell, and I want to just thank the administration, BPD, and the union for working on this contract and for getting to an agreement and ratification without having to go before the JLMC. I think that shows the city's commitment, even if it's not happening at the pace that everyone wants it, but to make sure that all of our city employees have a fair contract pursuant to their union. And I think Lou, we spoke about this, and I do agree that I think it's a rare feat to have a list of offenses that would not be subject to arbitration. And so I have a lot of cautious optimism about what's in this agreement and about the incremental changes that we're going to see, both to discipline and to details, and to the city, frankly, being able to capture some of its money back when it comes to union release. So I think that's great. I have some questions about the offenses listed, and I also think that obviously the devil will be in the details. It will be in the implementation to see what does that look like. It says that if an officer's indicted or has had charges sustained through internal affairs, 1, and upheld at the trial board of appointing authority hearing, the discipline shall not be subject to the grievance and arbitration language. And then there's a list of offenses. But can you tell us, and I think we spoke about this and we talked about it a bit, Lou, but can you tell us if this were implemented in the past 5 years, for example, how many BPD officers would have been terminated as a result of this provision being in place?
I mean, that's not...
or 10 years, 5 or 10 years.
It's not a number that we have immediately, in front of us. We can compile that and give it to you, but it's really not, that is not what we were necessarily, I mean, there were cases that we focused on that we believed had such severity that we would not want to see them overturned. That was the animating principle, but it's more, what we were pursuing here was putting limitations on the role of an outside arbitrator to, under any circumstances, going forward, second guess the decision of the PC. So I don't want to represent that, we were going after 50 or 100 cases in the last, 10 years. We'll be glad to get you that information, but I mean, this is as much as anything a good government reform about limitations on something that never should have been as far-ranging as it was.
Thank you, Lou. And I guess through the chair, I would request that information. I think it would be helpful for us to have. So 5 years from now, if we're here and we're again taking a look at the contract, we can see like what is the progress that we've made? What has been the efficacy of this provision? Do we need to tinker with it? And I think having that data would be helpful. But just for clarification, so sustained through internal affairs, what does that process look like? Who is composed of, like when we look at internal affairs, we're talking about police officers, like what does that decision-making process look like?
We can speak to that. So it's a complaint is made, we investigate internal affairs, there's a finding. I agree with the finding of sustained, and we have a hearing board, and it goes to that hearing board internally, and if it's confirmed through the hearing board, then they would not be eligible for arbitration on any of these offenses.
Hearing board, and then do you have another?
Internally,
okay.
All Boston Police.
And then do you have another say as commissioner after the hearing board makes its determination?
Yes, I will to agree with it, right?
Or to disagree, and if you disagree, then it's not?
No, that if the hearing board is their form of arbitration internally. So it is my hearing board, as a matter of fact. So more than likely, I will agree with whatever decision is made to that.
And just to be clear, the role of the hearing officer in that process is to determine whether or not the charges should be sustained. It's the determination of discipline that then falls squarely to the police commissioner based on that finding.
Okay, right, so it just won't go to arbitration and the disciplinary, so its termination is not even the required discipline? It's just that it's not going to arbitration?
Correct.
Okay. And then what does it mean for it to be upheld at the trial board? What does that look like?
So,
and just to be clear, that's not like an independent judiciary. That's like,
no,
it's still internal to the BPD. We're still talking about police officers.
Yes, the deputy superintendent who runs it, and they go before and they present evidence, both through our legal defense, locally, and then our department, and the BPPA's legal team, as well as the individual. They put on a case, and basically to decide whether or not the case is truly sustained or not. Whatever that decision is, it comes to me. I'm the decision maker regardless of the discipline. But that would, end it as far as arbitration is concerned, their ability to arbitrate if it's one of these offenses.
Okay. I know it's been a short, I think it's been maybe a year and a half that you've been
Yes.
in the job. Have there been scenarios where decisions have been, charges for an officer has been upheld at the trial board or appointing authority hearing?
That are being appealed?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you know what those?
I think Abishano.
Yeah, so there are at least three officers that have been terminated, one not in this union since the commissioner's tenure.
Has it been in one of the other, in the detectives?
One is from the superior officers and one is from the patrolmen. And those two both have appeals pending. One is at civil service, and I believe the other is going through the grievance and arbitration process.
Okay, thank you. So I think I asked for a retrospective of like, if this were in place, how many of, in the past 5 to 10 years, how many officers would have had to forego arbitration as a result? But if we could also have a list through the chair of charges in the last 5 to 10 years, last 10-year window, that have been sustained through internal affairs. So that's one list, and upheld at the trial board. And just for purposes, I'm actually not less curious about like who the officers were than what the charges were. That's what matters, because I think it's like I'm trying to measure the weightiness of this provision and to see like what meat are we going to be able to get on this. And then my last question with regard to this section is about, have you thought about what is the relationship with this and the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, which I think is still important for us to be talking about and think about how they gain their strength when it comes to police oversight. So what is the role and the relationship with OPAD in this provision?
And so currently there's not one, but certainly as we get a new leadership there, we can certainly talk about ways in which we can certainly combine to make sure that our discipline process is reflective of the city and what we're looking for. So we can absolutely have that conversation. Yeah.
Wondering if there any other insight from the city about OPAT and.
Well, I mean, we are, as you are aware, working through the process of recruiting new leadership for it. So there's a lot that's in flux. I think it's a bit of a moving target, and I think it's not necessarily something that we have a lot to share on today.
Okay, thank you. Is that my time, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I have some questions around details and also promotion of officers to help us meet some of our diversity needs, but I will save those questions for round 2.
Perfect. Council Brady, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all. Congratulations. Ratifying this contract is a significant achievement. I know a lot of hard work has gone into it, and there's some very exciting forward-leaning reforms in here. I'm, over the years, in talking about overtime and medical leave, etc., it seems that there's a significant improvement in the number of officers are off for the long period of time, like over a year. Those numbers are definitely looking better. The method, the implementation of some sort of check-in to establish whether that officer needs to be on long-term medical leave, or whether they're able to come back, or whether they need to have a planned departure from the department, I think is very important. In terms of just thinking about the implications of the overtime, the percentage of 10% of the membership on long-term leave for more than a year, what sort of pressure does that put on your overtime schedule?
I mean, 10% of anything is significant in the sense that it's a lot of officers, you know, particularly if they're from a particular district. So, you know, getting officers back to work is really important, particularly when we are down, you know, so many positions in general. Particularly, you know, if it's at 10%, we need to do much better than that. And I think this will go a long way helping us do that.
So, and these are the folks that hit the year mark. In terms of, you know, any time away from your job it puts a lot of pressure on your colleagues, your other officers. You know, just on average, do we have an idea of what the average length away from the job is for medical reasons?
We don't have an average. I know that the medical unit has worked really hard to establish regular check-in procedures so that we are checking in with those that are out injured to try to get individuals back to work as quickly as possible, as long as they are capable. And so we have seen a decrease as a result of those protocols of the number of officers out. But I will also note that our overtime cost as it relates to replacement personnel is often the largest percentage of our overtime expenditures, and that is tied directly to people that are out of work for some reason or another, including those currently out injured.
And I really appreciate, I don't know if Councillor Flaherty has chiropractors in his family. He's a very strong advocate for chiropractic intervention. I think timely and appropriate medical support and physical therapy or chiropractic services to get people, when the injury is in acute stage, as a physical therapist, it's better to treat it well at the very outset, and it'll decrease you'll get better outcomes all round. The other question I had was with regard to the details. Like, I'm delighted to see this. You know, there's so much construction happening out in Alston Brighton. I know my colleague from South Boston has similar concerns that only covering half of the details has been very problematic. And we've had very busy thoroughfares with 18-wheelers parked in the middle of the road, and there isn't nobody in sight. So I think this is really helpful. And I'm hoping that it will actually free up, you know, bringing in more resources in terms of other sworn officers from the universities or whatever, and also our municipal security staff to cover these details is going to be really helpful. Do you think that, is the scenario that it'll actually improve? You'll have more officers available for regular police duties if they'll not be.
So, again, details of when they're doing it on their off time, but it certainly will go to the prioritization of what they're doing. And the fact is that we have so many priority ones that have to be filled, and the fact that they're there is I think that's really, really important around that. As far as, the ability to do their regular duties, that's a different time, right? They can only do details when they're not working currently. So I don't know if there's going to be a correlation between that. But it will certainly have a public safety effect, because if we increase all of those, we'll have a much more visible, public safety presence throughout the city in multiple spots, which ultimately leads to much more safety across the board. And that's, I think, the ultimate goal of this as well.
Thank you. That was really all the questions I had. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Are yours?
I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Let me just turn off the timer. So, Lou, there's been a request for the contract. The one that we have circulating is, from 2007 to 2010, but I believe there's an updated version from 2010 to 2017. Is the administration able to provide the council with the most recent CBA? 2017 to 20, right?
17 to 20 is an MOA that's on the city OLR website. We can produce anything we have, but this contract hasn't been integrated in quite some time. So you've got a lot of disparate documents that have to be integrated, and they haven't been. So we're glad to provide you anything that you request, but I'm not sure the thing you want exists.
So the most recent contract that's been integrated is the 20...
I believe that's correct, yes, but I could confirm that.
Okay. From 27 to 2010, right?
I think that's right, yes.
Councilor Flynn.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that would be the contract that was just signed by the city administration and with the Police Patrolmen Association. Is that correct?
Say your question again, please.
So what the contract that I'm seeking is the contract that was recently signed by the city administration in the Patrolmen Association. That's the contract I would like to look at.
So what was signed was the, and Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, is the MOA, and that has not been to my understanding integrated into the.
We will provide the latest integrated version. We have it. We will provide it.
All right.
Is that a public document, Mr. Chair?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Could we get, Mr. Chair, could we get that so we could base our questions on that document?
Luke, what's the timeline for having that document?
Can we take a break? Get it right now.
All right, we'll take a 10-minute recess?
Yeah.
All right, we're in recess.
Okay.
Councilor Royal, if I may, yes.
Yep. Okay, you have to go?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Cox. And Nicole, you are staying to answer any questions.
Yes, Councilor, I'll stay.
Thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're in recess. between the City of Boston and Boston Patrolmen Association. Please let us know. We'll get you a copy of the July 1st, 2007 to June 30th, 2010, and the MOA, just an amendment or to this contract. So please, if you want a copy, please let us know, and Central staff will be able to provide a copy. With that said, we'll go for second rounds of questions. In this round, every counselor will have another 5 minutes for questioning, and we'll start in the same order. So Counselor Flynn, then followed by Counselor Murphy. Counselor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For 6 years, I've been advocating as frequently as I can that we are significantly down the number of police officers on the streets of Boston. Our population continues to grow. Our business community continues to grow, especially in the South Boston waterfront, the downtown area as well. And officers are leaving at record numbers. I understand that we have 2,100 police officers now. I guess my question is, how many of those are on patrol?
Give me 1 second and I'll give you the most recent strength report as of this morning. So as of this morning, our sworn complement is 2,103. That includes all ranks. So for patrol, that includes 1,452 patrol officers. Of the 1,452 patrol officers, we have 136 of them currently out on a medical leave. And there may be other leaves dependent, so that would be a rough estimate of active duty uniformed patrol officers.
Thank you. So we basically have 1,200 patrol officers patrolling the streets of Boston. Certainly supervisors would also respond to crime scenes as well to support the patrol officers. 1,200 officers is, in my opinion, a public safety crisis. We're doing the best we can in terms of hiring police, but we need to do more. Our police officers are retiring, again, record numbers, but we should be at 2,400 patrol officers patrolling the streets. Police officers are working forced, or mandatory, I should say, mandatory overtime. Unhealthy for the police officer, unhealthy for his or her family, and for the residents of Boston. Unfair in my opinion. So let me ask a question as we debate this contract. Why aren't we giving police officers that have to work mandatory overtime? Why aren't we factoring those mandatory hours into the police officers' retirement? Because we factor in only the salary of a police officer for their retirement, but these police officers are working more than their traditional 40 hours a week. They're working 70 hours a week, and they're being told to do that. I don't like using the word force, but it's mandatory. And so if it's mandatory for them to work these hours, why, and I'm not saying to change it now, but going forward, let's have a serious conversation. If we're not serious about hiring police officers in record numbers, let's give these police officers the opportunity to ensure that those hours that they worked are part of their retirement system. Jim, what say you?
That is a question we could certainly, we know it's not part of the retirement calculation, that overtime, there are certain pensionable elements of compensation, and that overtime is not one. You would certainly have to consult with the retirement system to see what modifications to pension law to even accommodate something like that.
I'd say, Mr. President, that's heavily regulated. And by heavily, I mean entirely regulated by PERAC and the definitions they promulgate of what is and isn't considered pensionable. So I'd venture to say, even if we wanted to agree to it, it's not something we could legally do.
It's not something we can legally do, but it's something we could at least pursue and try to have a conversation about it. I just think the process of mandatory overtime for police officers is unfair to those officers, their family. It's unfair to the residents of Boston that depend on the police officers. They provide exceptional public safety support to the residents of the city. And we're having police officers that are working a 14 to 15-hour shift, and we expect that police officer to be on top of his or her game on the 15th hour of duty. And then what happens if there's an issue on the 15th hour of duty and there's a mistake made? Let's blame the police officer. So we're putting a lot of responsibility on the officer and taking the responsibility off us as a city, off us as a city council, off us as a police department and in administration, myself included. So I just want to acknowledge that this is unfair, that we have police officers that are working 15, 16 hours a day, and then when there's an issue, we're going to blame the police officer for potentially making a mistake after very few hours of sleep. I've done that. I was in the military 24 years. I've worked 24-hour shifts, and it's brutal. Your skills decrease significantly after 12 hours, after 13 hours, never mind after 15 hours. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council President Flynn. Council Murphy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank you for that recess we took for a moment. The devil is in the details, and I do believe it's my job to make sure that what we're voting on and that we're paying attention to all of the details. And I know that we did receive a list of highlights, and we're told, that ask any question you want, but making sure we know what questions to ask without all of the information. So I do feel better after speaking with the union and others that we do have enough information to make sure that we have what we need to make, a decision that's best for our offices at the end of the day. This contract is a contract that will protect the offices and make sure that we continue to have a force that feels respected by the city and that we can grow our force. A lot of the conversation today is all around details and the cost of overtime, and I expect the next 2 years on the council, I will be continuing, hopefully along with all of my colleagues, advocating that we hire more police officers. At the end of the day, we can say we're losing 10, 15 here to fire. We're always going to lose police officers. We lose teachers every day. We lose people in every department across the city. So I think our focus should be on how do we attract and keep our offices. And one of the things that I know many police officers currently there are deciding whether or not to choose this as a profession are afraid that they're, that the commissioner, the department, the city, they don't have their back. And if push came to shove and something happened, that they don't feel secure. So making sure that this contract is obviously highlighting when something does go wrong, that police officers are punished accordingly, but when day in and day out, and like Council President said, when you're working double shifts, triple shifts, when you're forced to work details. So I'm happy that we're addressing how we hand out details, but I think it's important that we continue to have hearings throughout this year to assess how it's going and making sure that we can put a lot of things on paper, but when we see it actually play out, I think it's important that we continue to monitor and watch this to make sure that the result that was intended, I heard by other colleagues several times, like unintended consequences can go in many different directions. So making sure that the intention that the union had and what the administration had, and what, making sure that at the end of the day, we do the right thing to keep our city safe and to keep our force feeling respected, because every city worker in the city of Boston should feel that way. But no other questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Council Murphy. Council Durkin?
Thanks. I just had a question about the details and more information about if you could explain more about the kicked-in details and the 24-hour. Basically, that officers wouldn't be able to be paid for 24 hours. Because there's a part of this that says that they will be disciplined as defined in the 2006 guidelines. Could you explain more about what that looks like and what the 2006 guidelines are for officers that are that don't perform details that they're assigned?
Certainly. So generally, the concept is meant to address a practice where an officer accepts a detail and then perhaps a more attractive detail opportunity comes along and the officer can kick in the originally accepted job, which often will leave that job unfilled. What this does is it creates parameters and timeframes around when a job can be turned back in to ensure that those priority details continue to get filled so that the highest public safety need gets addressed. The 2006 guidelines were agreed to between the city and the BPPA, and they have provisions around disciplinary type actions that can be taken if a violation of the protocols occur. And that includes specifically removal from eligibility to perform a detail for a certain period of time. And so if somebody is consistently or engaged in a pattern of kicking in details, we have the availability of those 2006 guidelines in addition to the existing disciplinary protocols to the department to address those concerns.
So kicking in details means filling a detail, but filling a more attractive detail?
So kicking it in, if I'm an officer, I accept a job, and then another more attractive detail comes along. I kick in the one I had already accepted and I take a second opportunity. So that originally accepted job may go unfilled because it's too close in time to when the work is expected to be performed, or there's lack of incentive for an officer to take that job.
That's helpful, thank you. And obviously, as the district counselor for both Fenway Park and TD Garden, making sure that, and having been a huge Celtics fan these past 2 seasons, I can tell you that seeing Causeway Street the night of a playoff game can be something that we particularly need to make sure is filled. I'm actually in the process of getting a sign fixed that someone climbed up and held onto and cracked. It can be incredibly dangerous over in that area. And when I say dangerous, I just mean people are having fun, but there's a huge crowd of people, which obviously, so I'm really heartened to see that those details would be prioritized because obviously that's, having talked about national security, those are really the spots in Boston that we need to make sure are protected and have enough officers working. So thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. Councilor Lara?
Thank you, Chair. I want to start off with some questions that I think are just my general understanding of the contract to clarify. So 2 things that are in the memorandum of understanding now. One of them is about, and 2 of them are about the details. So one is that the police commissioner gets to decide how many retirees have access to the details. Is that correct?
That's correct. The commissioner would establish guidelines for retirees to determine eligibility for performing details in that category.
Will he also be determining how many, not just eligibility?
That's correct. That would be part of the guidelines.
Thank you. And in terms of hiring with the higher education institutions, the city also gets to decide which and how many institutions they contract with.
Presumably, that would require an agreement between the department and the higher education institution that would set forth the terms for how and how many and who would be eligible.
And the commissioner does that, or the city? I mean, well, internally.
I think for purposes of this, we're the same thing. I mean, I think we'll do it in consultation. Yeah, but there's nothing that mandates that every Boston college or university gets signed up to do this program. I mean, I think it will be selective. So.
Exactly. So just because there is a list, just because they have the ability to do it does not mean that they are all going to have access to it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then my two other questions that I have, what are the weekly, because it's not in the MOU, so I'm assuming that they stayed the same. Can you remind me what the weekly work hour limits are for the patrol officers?
Sure. So the current rule, I don't want to incorrectly state it. There's an 18-hour rule.
18 hours is for the day?
18 hours, I believe, in a 24-hour period.
Yep.
And then there's a 90-hour-a-week rule.
Got it. Do the details still count for the working limits for the week?
They do.
Great. And so I wanted to clarify that because there was something that Councilor Braden stated and that the commissioner stated about how details are done on off hours and therefore do not impact the work that officers do. Because it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that that's not true. If an officer takes on 8 hours of a detail early on in the week and then reaches their threshold for 90 hours of that week, is it true that then whatever hours are left over need to be filled by another officer that is now being paid overtime?
So an officer's responsibility, first and foremost, is the hours within their regularly scheduled tour of duty. And so if an officer is responsible for ensuring that they are able to work their regular tour and are managing anything above and beyond that. So first and foremost, standard tours would get filled before detail or overtime opportunities would.
So if my standard tour is, excuse my ignorance, I don't know enough about this, so this is just hypothetical. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm working, obviously, maybe with a day in between. So maybe Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm working those 4 days. I'm at my maximum 90 hours for the week. I am not allowed to take any detail work.
I believe that's correct.
So they will not, if they are already scheduled in their tours for the week for their maximum hours, they will not be allowed to submit their name into the app to receive details.
Officers have to stay within the 18 and 90 hour maximum rule requirements for working.
So I'm going to ask the question again. If they are already scheduled to work their maximum hours for the week, they will not be able to put in for details, because I think some of the work that we've seen and some of the conversation that we've seen about details is that people are just like, oh, I gotta take some time here, so I'm gonna do, front load it. So can you talk to me a little bit about what that would look like, what it looks like now, and what it would look like in the future? Because there's been some vague sharing from the commissioner and from the administration about how this is gonna help us really bring in cost and bring in overtime cost, and I'm not really seeing where the savings are.
So an example of where we may see a savings is if there is a large-scale event that might fall into this priority one category currently, but we can't fill all of the paid detail assignments. Paid detail assignments, the costs are covered by the vendor.
That's correct.
If the need is determined to have a police presence there due to the public safety implications of the event, the department, through overtime, may staff those empty or unfilled paid detail positions.
Yes.
When it's staffed on overtime, that is a cost that the department incurs as opposed to billing to a vendor. So if we're able to ensure that the priority paid detail assignments are filled at a cost attributable to a vendor, a utility company, a construction company, that is an overtime cost that the department would not have to incur in order to make sure that the police presence is appropriate.
So we're saving money because now sworn officers are required to take all of the type 1s, and those are going to be filled, and then we have a list of people we're going to be taking over.
I would actually describe it differently. The type 1s have to be filled first. It doesn't, the sworn officers go first in the hierarchy, but that doesn't necessarily mean the type 1s won't be filled by other people, particularly the traffic control ones, as we move forward. So it's more about the detail being filled than necessarily who's filling it. Type 1s get filled first. That's what this prioritization does.
That's fine. I think my question is more about whether or not officers meeting their weekly hourly limits through doing detail work, and then having those tours having to be filled by other officers being paid overtime. Now, from what I'm hearing, that's no longer going to be the case, but it is unclear, and so I want a clear response that is not going to be happening. That if you are at your maximum hours, you're not going to be able to put in for extra detail hours because you've met your tour of duty comes first.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
If an officer is at their maximum limit for working hours, which is 90
In the week.
Mm-hmm. They are scheduled for their 90 hours, right? Their regular tour of duty is scheduled for their 90 hours. Are they still eligible to take on detail work through the app?
Not if it would put them over the 90 hours in the week.
Got it. Now, if an officer says, I'm going to work in these details in the front, and maybe they're not over the 90 hours, but it's an 8-hour detail, and they get put over, and they say, don't show up for a shift later on in the week.
I would have to double check, but I don't know a scenario where we would tell an officer not to show up for their shift. I also would note that the regular shifts don't total 90 hours.
Yep.
Right, and so there is some buffer.
So you leave a buffer, all as is now?
There is a buffer because the
Okay.
regular shift for tours of duty in a week doesn't equal 90
Doesn't
hours.
equal 90 hours. Got it. So the limit includes the ability for them to do the details.
I feel like this is like a math essay.
No, I know, it's fine. I understand it. I got it. I'm making sure I understood. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for that roundabout way of going about it. Chair, are we gonna have a third round?
Yes, we'll have a third round.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to focus in my questions to make sure that I can get them all answered. So my next set of questions are about the hierarchy. And so you've already answered about the retirees. The commissioner will decide that, making retirees eligible for the details. Can you talk to me a little bit about what communication happened with the Boston Housing Authority Police Force, the Municipal Protective Services, and the other universities, and what is their interest in filling these details?
We did not have communication with them directly, but as a strategic initiative in opening up the ability of other people that are sort of aligned with sworn officers to be able to perform details, they seemed like natural ones to integrate. Okay. So, and then the details, I mean, frankly, the details of how these things get integrated are actually going to have to be handled by the labor organizations that represent them. So this was merely an agreement, not unlike colleges and universities in Boston and retirees. It's one more source of labor that can perform details, but the when and how are still to be worked out.
So if you didn't communicate directly with them, did we just say, did we add them? Because I understand why we added retirees, why we added municipal police. They're like lowest paid force. Like I understand why everybody else is on there. And so if the colleges and universities didn't come to the administration directly, why add another layer of an extra force that would potentially take away jobs from the entity that would be hiring civilians?
Well, I mean, I think again, Counselor, our goal in this was broader simply than creating opportunities for the labor supply. The labor supply is one part of what we're doing. Our goal was to formulate a detail system that works. And so the question at the end of the day is, are we going to have enough labor to cover the details that we need to cover? And what comes next, how many details there are and who are working them. I mean, I think that is entirely within our control. And so while we were negotiating this hierarchy, we needed to ensure that we had enough supplies of labor to be able to cover these details. And so that's why we integrated colleges and universities. It seemed like a natural group that would make some sense to put in the hierarchy.
I can appreciate that. I think I'm not concerned about the hierarchy. I have less qualms than other people about the hierarchy. I think having the hierarchy there is fine. My concern is making sure that city jobs are going to city people. That is what I'm focused on. And so I would like to know what percentage of all of these additional officers are Boston residents. I want to talk about this entity that is going to be doing the hiring for the civilians. Are they going to be required to hire city people? Are they going to be, I want to make sure that these jobs that are now being made available are being worked on by people from the city. And so my questions are not necessarily to stand against the hierarchy or to say that there's, I think, like you said, this is a negotiation. There are two people at the negotiation table. This is what we could get done. I think it's forward movement, but I also want to make sure that in the implementation, the jobs are going into the places where they should go. And so do we know how many of these officers are from the city of Boston or live in Boston, are Boston residents?
Meaning all of the people in the hierarchy?
Everybody in the hierarchy.
We haven't done it yet, so the answer is no, we don't have that information.
Thank you. I know my timer went off. I'll wait for my next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. Councilor Coletta, followed by Councilor Louis-Jay.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you again for your answers. I do just want to uplift the request first put on the floor by the chair to implement the technology system as soon as possible. This is all contingent on that, and whatever you need from us to push that through, do it. I know it's going through a lot. If you need to contract it out, I think just underscoring that is something I wanted to do and uplift. Going to the details, again, I just have a couple of quick questions. The red line streets, so I talked about the amount of utility work happening in East Boston and just how frustrating it is. There's a lot of streets in, especially the north end, that could be considered high use. And so I would love to see what this looks like. I know the BTD is on here, but through the chair, just understanding what those red line streets are, if they've already been determined, or if you know if it's going to happen on a case-by-case basis.
So the map of the red line streets already exists, and it's something through BTD that gets updated periodically, and it is a fairly significant number of the streets, including all of the evacuation routes and the snow emergency routes. And so we can certainly share a copy of the map with the council.
Thank you. I guess the other two parts of my question have to do with the 4 and 8 hour detail minimums. Could you just give me a history of these numbers? Are they arbitrary? Why do they exist? And who determines what is a 4 hour versus 8 hour detail?
So when a vendor calls in a detail, the vendor sets the time for the job that's required. And historically, I can only speak at least back to my experience, which goes back to 2007. The distinction between the 4 and 8 is if an officer works anything between 1 and 4, they get paid for 4 hours. If they work anything between 4 and 8, they get paid for 8 hours. I don't know who, when, or why those were the minimums that were established, but that's a practice that's been contractual going back a fairly significant period of time.
Okay. Has there been any consideration to change those numbers at all? I guess what are we seeing on the ground?
So I think what I've seen is the majority of details are scheduled for 8 hours. I don't have a percentage of how many are actually go the full duration of the 8 hours, or how many officers are paid for what I would refer to also as a roll-up, but that's certainly information that we could look into and provide.
Okay, and yeah, that was my next question, if we were tracking if the 4 to 8 hour minimum is not being met, and how much we're paying for work that is just something that's in a contract, so therefore we have to pay it. Do we have those numbers?
I'm fairly certain that we do have the numbers available to us. The other thing I would note that this contract does in relation to that same concept is if you're working a detail and your detail ends early, you can't then go and accept a second detail that overlaps with that same period of time. So
Okay.
that was one reform in that area that's addressed through this contract.
Okay, great. Thank you. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Councilor Louis-Jay.
Just to dovetail and finish my questions on discipline, I just want to always in a lot of our systems, because there's baked into it a lot of injustice and racism and issues that are still ongoing. So I just want to make sure that when it comes to discipline and disciplinary measures, that we have safeguards even in this list, or safeguards in implementation, that when we're thinking about discipline, that we are sensitive to the fact that there tends to be over-discipline of workers of color, period, regardless of what entity they're in. And that's true of BPD officers as well, disciplined more strictly than their counterparts. So wondering what the safeguards will have to make sure that that isn't happening?
There are several factors that go into the determination of discipline made by the police commissioner. Those often include the officer's own disciplinary history. It includes a review of comparable cases and disciplinary action taken in analogous fact patterns. And that practice certainly won't change going forward. But the offenses identified in the list are offenses that I think we can all agree warrant termination, regardless of who the officer is, and that was why it was important to call these out specifically and to call out specifically the police commissioner's authority in determining that an officer who commits these offenses is no longer suitable to be a Boston police officer.
Thank you. Do you know, has the department done a review of discipline based on race and gender to examine disciplinary processes and the discrimination that exists within it?
I'm not sure of that, Counselor.
Okay, thank you. I hope that's something that we can do because the data bears that it happens, and we hear it from our officers of color, even from your officers not of color. So I want that to be something that we are laser focused on, and that, you know, I think that, again, I think this is a good list. I think this is a rare feat. I think that this is progress, and progress that we want to see. But again, it's all about implementation, and it's all about trying to check for our own biases that are baked into systems. And dovetailing off of that, I know it's not part of this contract, but I know that there are promotions happening in BPD, and you know, I think that there is, we've seen a lot of progress when it comes to command staff, but still within our supervisory ranks, it's not where we want it to be when we're talking about the people who are on crime scenes and are making the decisions, who are, you know, making the decisions about evidence and so forth. So what efforts, what are we doing? I mean, I know it's like hanging over our heads, it's happening very soon. These, what efforts are we making to make sure that even at the supervisory level, that we're doing everything we can to really build out what the commission often talks about, that vision for equity, which really does require us to be bold with how we're making decisions about who moves forward and who is in leadership positions within all parts of our city.
Certainly. So I apologize if I'm saying anything that the folks here already know.
And I wish the commissioner were here, obviously, so that he could answer this question.
So when we make promotions, it's a very regimented process that's governed by civil service and specifically Chapter 31, right?
Yeah, and I understand that, but there is discretion, especially when it comes to who's eligible to go for trainings, and I understand the rigidity of civil service and the problems that often come as a result of that. But there is discretion in the same way that there's discretion, the commissioner has discretion when it comes to determining at the internal affairs level, like who's the level, whether the investigation continues and that nature. There is discretion from BPD on how those decisions on promotions are made.
So when we're promoting, if we're considering a group of individuals that are in the same band, meaning they had a tied score on the exam, that is when discretion plays a role in determining who to promote if we don't have enough vacancies equivalent to the number of people in the band. I can tell you that in every decision the commissioner makes, he considers diversity, he considers equity, and he wants to make sure that at all ranks we are reflective of the community that we serve. He's also looking, he says it a lot, round peg, round hole, who is most qualified for the jobs that we're looking to fill. So in considering all of those factors, he's looking to create a diverse and qualified and capable workforce at every rank, and takes advantage of those opportunities where he does have discretion outside of the regimented statutory process to make those decisions.
Thank you, and I just urge that it's not just like one of the consideration, that it's the top consideration where seniority is already baked into the civil service process. And we know that seniority is something that negatively affects people of color and women who don't have the same level of seniority as their counterparts. So just asking that if we are serious about equity and serious about diversity, that is forefront when we do have that discretion. It's incredibly important. I know that in this contract, we don't have a lot of reform to overtime itself. My understanding is that when we look at the contracts for the superiors, we'll get more into that, especially when it comes to court-ordered overtime. And I'm hoping that that's reform that we can see at that level. I'm just putting that on the table. I think just as important as getting discipline right, that I've cared about deeply, that we get that right as well. And then, Nicole, you also mentioned that there are several, when it comes, now moving on to details, that there are several companies that can perform this function already, and can you provide, through the chair, can you provide the city council with a list of those companies? And if you know right now if any of those companies are owned by Black or brown people, or are staffed already by folks who are Boston residents or formerly incarcerated folks, if you know that.
I don't, and when I speak about knowing there are other companies, I lean back into my former life and my time in between my city service and experience in evaluating potential vendors that provide that technology-based program. I don't have a breadth of knowledge about all of the available vendors beyond the fact that I know there are several being used by other departments in the Commonwealth.
Do you know if any of them are Black-owned or Latino-owned?
I do not.
Women-owned?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Councilor, the only thing I would add to that is we're also bound by procurement laws, so we're going to do an RFP, and whoever puts in for the work will be analyzed by a whole system. So I a little reluctant to make a list of people who could then subsequently bid. I think that could put us in some hot water with the Inspector General, so. Understood.
It's just that when Nicole said it, I was like, oh, so there are companies in mind that we've thought about specifically, and that helped us determine the language, and so.
Not in mind.
Okay.
That had anything to do with the development of the language. Just again, in a municipality I worked for previously, we transitioned to a software-based system, and so I do know there are vendors out there who do the work.
Okay, and Chair, if you'll indulge me with one more short question. And it's not even a question, well, it is a bit of a question. So when you look at the details, it says number 4, the City of Boston may contract for additional personnel, ... You get to number 4. The entity has extensive experience in recruiting employees who are reliable, punctual, and have a minimum of 3 years experience providing staffing, okay? This is about to be a bit of an annoying question, but I think when you're talking about the 3 years experience providing staffing, you're talking about the entity.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The way this is written, and especially because have is plural, it makes it seem as though it's referring to the qualifications of the employee. That the employee is required to have 3 years experience. And so I just want to make sure that that is not what we're saying here, because we don't want to create further barriers to entry for folks who could be working towards civilianizing the process, that we're not going to require them to have that same level of experience that we require of the entity.
It is very definitely not referring to the employee, it is referring to the entity, and I can say further, Councillor, that the reason this contract took 18 months to negotiate is because we would not bend on this principle. The administration would not bend on this principle that these jobs, we needed these people to be in the hierarchy, that is to say, Boston residents doing this work, and we would not bend on the question of civilians doing it. So I understand that the language to somebody who's reading it from the outside can raise some questions, but I can tell you as the guy who has done this for 18 months and who was in the alligator pit for 18 months fighting over this exact thing, that relates to the entity and not the employees.
Okay, thank you. It's a small singular plural issue that makes it questionable, but I understand what you're saying, and thank you, and thanks for all your work on getting us here to this contract.
Thank you, Councilor Louis Jen. I have a few questions. Starting off with the details. What is the ballpark upfront cost, or what is the administration thinking about when they're going to be allocating funding to training, new civilian flaggers?
I honestly, Councillor, I mean, that is what comes next. I mean, here again, what we have in front of us is the what. We set out to break the monopoly of people who could perform details of only sworn officers. The how and the when come next. So it's just not something we can presage, and anything I tell you would be at best a guess, and that would be irresponsible.
And this is just a data question on the $83 million. I think that's the total of the contract. My math might be wrong. Can you provide us, and you could submit it unless you have it now, and sorry, I forgot to acknowledge, we have also been joined on the panel by Ellen Hatch, who is the Deputy Chief of Finance for the City of Boston. How does $83 million break down over the next few years? and how much money is being spent retroactively as well? And then just to add to that question, how much does the administration expect the FY25 budget to increase from FY24 to cover salary increases and back pay awarded by this contract?
First part was you wanted to know the breakdown of the 83 million.
Yes.
So that's an estimate, obviously, of cost. We'll see what it actually is once it's applied to the earnings and the retros. But we think for FY21, it's about 2.8 million. FY22, about 5 million. FY23, about 8.4 million. FY24 obviously is before you in the supplemental for 30.8 million. And then 25 would be about 35 million. So we anticipate for the FY25 budget that it would go up around 35 million. Obviously, we'll see what it actually is when we get closer.
All right. Thank you. I have no further questions. And for my council colleagues, I'm assuming, since you're here, you have a third round of questions? All right. Councilor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also, Mr. Chair, is there an opportunity for the president of the Patrolmen Association to speak as well?
Yeah, we'll give the president of the Patrol Union a chance to speak.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nicole, I know you mentioned the maximum number of hours a police officer can work is 18. Once the first couple days when the police commissioner got to Boston as the commissioner, we did have an incident where at least one police officer worked a 24-hour shift. And that was the first meeting I had with the commissioner, expressing how dangerous it is to have a police officer working a 24-hour straight shift. And he said to me that would never happen again. And to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't happened again. So I appreciate that, but I'm still concerned about the maximum 18-hour shift. I still think that's excessive, in my opinion. I didn't ask the union their opinion. I didn't ask the police department their opinion. But if you're working at 7 in the morning and you're working the entire day, and then at 12:30 in the morning the next day, there's a major incident where you have to, unfortunately, draw your service revolver. I'm concerned about that. And I go back to the lack of police we have on the streets of Boston. And so I guess my question is, does the police commissioner agree with the 18-hour maximum rule, or is that something we are able to consider? What is that having on the morale of rank and file police officers?
I think what I can say is the way that the current rule is written is that no officer can work the equivalent of 2 tours or more than 18 hours in a 24-hour period. I can certainly agree that we need more police officers, and I think the commissioner would share that sentiment. And I think that there's a role that we can all play in attracting specifically Boston residents to join the Boston Police Department. Unfortunately, over the last several years, we've seen a fairly dramatic decline in the number of individuals who even want to sign up to take the test. And that can be for a whole host of reasons. But I think this is a great job. And the police commissioner recognizes the incredible work being done by the men and women of the Boston Police Department every day. And we want to not only encourage them, but we want to highlight that work so that our young men and women in the city see this as a job that they want to do. That's something that was happening 10 years ago, and again, for whatever reason, those numbers have declined. We all play a role in making sure that everybody knows that being a part of the Boston Police Department is something to be proud of, it is something that is respected, and it is something that is cared for here in the city. And so I think if we can come together and really work towards that recruitment effort, we all know somebody who might be interested. If you're sitting around the table at dinner talking to somebody or talking to your neighbor, now is the time. We tried to hire 200 people for an academy last year. We didn't hit the target. We're trying again, and I hope that we're gonna hit the target by doing things a little bit differently. But at the same time, we all have an obligation to encourage people to sign up to take the civil service exam, which they can do through BPD's website or through the state civil service website, now through January 15th. There's a fee waiver, there are information sessions, there are study guides. And I think if we can focus our efforts on highlighting the job and increasing our numbers, hopefully we have less and less conversations about mandatory overtimes and people being ordered to work back-to-back shifts. Because I agree with you, that is not the ideal situation, and that is something we should all be working to reduce and hopefully eliminate altogether.
No, I agree with you. We still haven't, the 18 hours is still on the table. That's my concern. And I certainly try to do everything I possibly can to encourage people to take the examination as well. I also think we have a responsibility as elected officials to support police officers and their families and not always look to be critical of them. And society has been very critical of police and their families throughout the country. I think that has also had an impact on recruiting nationally and here in the city of Boston. But I'm still at the point of the 18 hours that a police officer is still able to work. That is a concern of mine, because again, a police officer on the 17th hour of his or her shift using their service revolver, is that factored in when that person is up potentially for a discipline-related issue, maybe service revolver or not, or dealing with the public? Is that factored in that police officer has been on their tour of duty for 17 hours a day?
I think every case is evaluated on its own, and I think if that's a factor, that certainly is something that would be considered, just depending on the circumstances of each individual incident.
No, I know each case is individually different, but my point is, if we're asking police officers to work 17 and a half hours a day, and then there's an incident, the public is complaining about that police officer, are we considering that as a major factor in determining discipline for that police officer?
I'm not sure I can answer that question as definitively as you're asking, Council President Flynn, but I appreciate the concern that you're raising, and it's certainly one that I will take back to the Commissioner and share with him for future discussion as well.
Yeah, I would, through the chair, I would like to get an answer on that question before I vote tomorrow. That's important, because I don't want to set people up to fail in this city, and I think we are setting people up to fail if they're working 17 hours a day, and we're not being consistent. We're not supporting that police officer. We're not supporting their family, and we wonder why that there's low numbers and people aren't taking the exam. Well, when you're working 17 hours and you get into an issue and you're up for discipline-related issues, is the police department going to support you? That's where I'm at. And as of right now, no one's giving me an answer that, yes, Council President Flynn, we are supporting that officer, because that officer is working 17 hours a day, mandatory overtime, and we know we made a mistake because we didn't hire enough police officers, and we're not going to take it out on that police officer for in factor that issue in. So I just want that to be on the table, and I want us to factor that in as a major issue when police officers are doing mandatory overtime. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council President Flynn. And I want to give an opportunity for the president of BPPA to give public testimony and see if any councilors have any questions. So President Larry Calderon, the floor is now yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Councilors, thank you for being here, and thank you for being present, as well as the department, Lou Mandarini. My name is Larry Calderoni. I know everybody in the room, and I'm very happy to be here and say that I'm on the side of the police commissioner on this, and Nicole Taub. and Lou Mandarini and Mayor Wu, and most of you that I believe sincerely in the room want to reward the men and women that I represent, the men and women in uniform that are out there on a daily basis, protecting the citizens of Boston, your family, and all the visitors that come to our great city. And they should be rewarded. They've worked diligently, and they've worked professionally, not only in my 30-year career, but over the last 3.5 years through COVID, through crises that we've had in the city of Boston. They've continued to come to work, expose themselves to the danger and the reality of this job. Yet at the same time, as Councilor Flynn has acknowledged, as well as many other councilors in here, double tours, triple tours, in excess of the 90-hour rule for years. We've been short-staffed for years, and our men and women continue to come to work and serve this great city. So rewarding them with a contract like this is a way to say thank you. It's a way to show their worth. It's a way to acknowledge them for the hard day-to-day crises that they're dealing with, and then having to go home to their families and try to shrug all of that off. So I stand here and I sat through this whole process, and I take the microphone imploring you to please move this forward. Get this to a council vote tomorrow. Vote this through affirmatively, because the men and women that are out there protecting you, our families in this great city, they deserve to be thanked. They deserve to be acknowledged with this contract. And I'd like to take another second to acknowledge the mayor and her team. Lou Mandarini sat here listening and answering all of these questions, along with Attorney Nicole Taub and Ellen Hatch and everybody on the mayor's side. This was a difficult task. For the last 3 years, we've had 3 different mayors, and this has been ongoing. And then Mayor Wu takes over, hits the ground running. I'm sure you heard the statements. It was a battle back and forth. We fought hard for our respective sides, and this is a fair agreement. Again, I stand here and I ask you to move this forward, and if there's any questions that I can answer from the floor, I'll gladly do so in my capacity if the chairman allows.
Yes. Any of my council colleagues have any questions for President Calderon? Well, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for your service, and looking forward to working with you in the future, and happy holidays.
Likewise, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you, councilors.
Councilor Murphy, the floor is yours.
Last week I was at Florian Hall for that wonderful award ceremony and heard numbers, and maybe you know Nicole, if not, if you could get back to me. The number of civil people who have signed up so far for the civil service test, which was shockingly low to the few people I was talking to so far, even though it's opened through January 15th. And if you have some data on how many have in the past, if we could go back like 10 years.
I don't know if I can go back 10 years.
Or just a few, so we know like the trend.
Sure.
Because we was at, like the hearing yesterday we had about, what was it, the snow plowing, right? We can sit here in this chamber, we can go through the budget, we can add jobs. Jim, you're here at those conversations where we increase budget for more staff, and then we come back a year later and find out, well, we weren't able to spend the money because we can't hire people, right? So is there hope that people even want to take the test to be considered?
So the numbers I have at my fingertips are the numbers that frankly are motivating us in this moment. Between 2022 and 2023, we saw a decline of approximately 500 city residents taking the civil service exam. It went from a number in the 800s to a number in the 300s. Mm-hmm. For historical perspective, in my 11 years with the department previously, I was never involved in the processing or hiring of a non-resident for the position of Boston police officer.
So it's
in the last class and in the most recent processing, we are already processing non-residents for the position. And so what we're trying to do now is track number of people that sign up, working with civil service to get the data, and also breaking it down by zip code so that we can see what neighborhoods need more targeted outreach in order to encourage people to sign up to take the test. So that we're hoping that a combination of information sessions and outreach in all of our communities, partnering with our unions to host information sessions, and also calling individuals that are currently on the list and letting them know, look out for a card, we're gonna call, we're hiring a class, that collective effort, it increases our initial numbers right out of the gate so that when we're hiring future classes, we can go back to that larger pool to draw from to hire.
Okay, but it's fair to say we're not looking to be turning anyone away. We'll probably won't have that many who even
So
sign up.
right now, we have a target number of 200 for a class to start in
March,
early,
is it?
in this March or April of 2024, and we're actively engaged in that process with some individuals already having moved on past the background investigation stage.
That's good. And one last question about the hours. I know we talked a lot about it. And police officers are smart, and they're gonna figure out probably weeks in advance, right, how many hours they had, what their scheduled time is, and if they're able to accept or not, because once you hit that, like what happens once you hit that mark? Because what if, because we know that police officers are forced for unforeseen things. We find out Monday that there's going to, be protesters at the Common, even though nothing did happen, but I heard it was like 300 officers were forced. So when you're forced last minute, but you've already made arrangements, or maybe you've already hit your 90, can you say no? Like at what point? Because then it comes down to the safety, right?
Sure.
If the numbers just aren't there and too many officers have already hit or are scheduled to hit their mark of their maximum hours, how do we make sure that the city's safe, but at the same time, we're not breaking our own rules when it fits our needs, to make sure that we're not bending it to cover things against their will? Like, can a police officer say no?
So the current protocol for the 18 hours in a 24-hour period and 90 hours in a week is set out in the department's rules and procedures. And that sets forth a protocol where if you get ordered to work and that's going to put you beyond your maximum allowable hours in that time period, there's a process that you're to undertake, that involves notifying the supervisor so that an evaluation can be made of whether or not it's appropriate for you to continue working as required. And so I don't want to misstate the process. It is laid out in our rules, and it's something puts onus a little bit on the officer as well as the supervisor in ensuring that officers that are working are doing so safely.
So there will still be times when officers work more than 90 hours?
I believe that it's fairly infrequent when there are formal waivers of those hour requirements.
But could a police officer choose between their regular shift over a forced, or what would be perceived as we need bodies here? Like, can you choose saying, well, no, because I'm already going to hit my maximum amount with my regular scheduled shifts?
So it's hard for me to think about individual circumstances, except that the priority obviously is that your shift and your assignment gets filled by you. Because
then it opens up if you're forced to not then show up on Friday because you were forced to do a detail on Wednesday night, someone has to cover your shift, or the captain is down a police officer.
There's a ripple effect that happens every time somebody doesn't come to work.
Will that data be kept on how that plays out?
I think we can certainly think about a way to track that, yeah. And then we've also taken steps to try to minimize the amount of shifts officers are getting ordered by supplementing our district uniform personnel with uniform personnel from some of our specialized units or non-district
That happened recently,
uniformed.
right, with the 4 specialized units to cover.
Yeah, so we have officers doing 20 tours in a district to help supplement those staffing levels, to help minimize the number of officers being ordered to work, because that in the districts is where we see that happening a lot.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. We'll have Councilor Durkin, followed by Councilor Lara.
Thank you so much, Chair. I will be voting in support of ratifying this contract tomorrow. Our role as a city council is to ratify these contracts and obviously to keep moving the ball forward when it comes to demanding excellence from our government bodies and entities. So like with any big organization, there's constant work to be done to ensure that we are doing everything we can to ensure excellence. So I was really pleased to hear from my colleagues some of that interest in making sure that we're continuing to push the ball forward. And I share in that, but I also want to thank the administration for everything they've done to make sure that we're closing out every single union contract that needs a collective bargaining agreement. So congrats, Lou, on that, and congrats to every city department that worked on this and the BPPA, I think. But as we continue to move forward, we'll have other opportunities to interact with the police department. And I know that our commissioner, Michael Cox, shares that commitment to excellence in the police department. But everything takes time and also constant monitoring, and I think that's really the role of this body. So thank you so much. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. Councilor Lara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilor Laurel. So I have questions, but they're basically about the entity of the hire. Like I mentioned before, my concern, and I think the concern of every councilor should be that these jobs are going to people in the city of Boston. Although I love the sentiment, my job as a district councilor is not to create jobs for people in the region, but to create jobs for people here in the city of Boston. Now we have this hierarchy in this contract that has, after our sworn Boston Police Department officers, has a list of 5 other people, other groups of people in the hierarchy, and 3 out of those 5 groups do not have a Boston residency requirement. The Boston Police Department retirees, the Boston-based College University police officers, and the contract personnel. So I'm concerned with the fact that these jobs that we're creating, we're breaking the monopoly, but we're breaking the monopoly for who? We're not breaking the monopoly for people who live in the city of Boston. We don't know what college and university we're contracting with. We don't know how many of their own officers live in the city of Boston, and even Boston Police Department retirees are not required to live here. And in the contract, it says that the city of Boston is going to may contract for additional personnel with a private entity. And these are the conditions. The entity is insured and can indemnify the city of Boston. The entity is a Massachusetts business organization with law enforcement experience that has knowledge of the paid detail system and operates within the city of Boston. It only hires employees to perform all work and eschews the use of independent contractors. Great. And the entity has extensive experience in recruiting employees who are reliable, punctual, and have a minimum of 3 years experience providing staffing for outside traffic control augmentation, public safety personnel. So again, I've already had this conversation with Lou. Councilor Legion brought it up, that it makes it seem like those are the requirements for the people doing the work. It's already been clarified here on the record that that's not true, so I'm not gonna focus too much on that. But it does say that the entity has extensive experience training individuals in traffic control and so on and so forth, familiarity with Boston neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. I think that these requirements are good requirements. They're requirements that should be set forth. But the city of Boston does have a precedent for setting requirements for contractors, whether it be for wages and opportunities for Boston residents, whether it be for people of color, for residents with quarries, through the Boston residents job policy, we have that. We also have the living wage ordinance, the Boston Jobs living wage, prevailing wage ordinance, and the quarry screening for vendors by the city of Boston. And so we do have some precedent in the city of Boston where we have put forth requirements for people. If we're going to use taxpayer money, we want to make sure that the people that we're contracting with are giving jobs to city of Boston residents. That is not outlined here in the contract. It's not set as a requirement, and I'm concerned about the fact that these jobs are not guaranteed to go to city of Boston residents, which is why I filed the ordinance that I did last Wednesday, because it would require the city through the RFP process to have community input on who this entity is and how this entity is brought on. And so, you know, I am less concerned about the contract than people would expect me to be. I'm much more supportive of it than people would expect me to be, but I am really concerned about the fact that these jobs are not guaranteed to go to people in the city of Boston. And so and I'm gonna talk to my council colleagues, and I wanna, maybe check in with Lou and hear from you. I gave you a copy of it. how can we make sure? Is I think there are a number of ways, right? I think there are a number of ways. I think with the retirees, if the commissioner requires that people who are eligible are people who still live in the city of Boston. I think through the Boston-based college and universities, if we contract with colleges whose majority of their police workforce live in the city of Boston, then that helps us make sure that there are more people who work in the city of Boston. And for the entity, for the contract personnel, if we pass this ordinance that makes sure that that RFP requires City of Boston residency, at least majority of City of Boston residency, that it requires that we prioritize people who live here, that come from diverse backgrounds in the City of Boston, and prioritizes, or at least at minimum, does not push away people who have quarries. It's going to help us do that. And so I think that with the other places in the hierarchy, there are other ways that we can do it, and that's by implementation through the commissioner. But I think with this contract personnel, it's not in the contract, and so we're going to have to put something in writing that really ensures that these jobs are going to go to the people in our neighborhoods.
Well, Councilor, what I can say is that, I mean, throughout this whole process, and this is with respect to all of the goals that we sought to achieve and that the mayor enunciated over a period of 18 months, we've had community and activists and religious leaders involved in all of it, and we will be more than happy to talk to anyone, anytime about how to shape this and make it effective. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure we need an ordinance to do that. I mean, we've done it from the beginning, and we adopted, you know, when we reached the ratification, you know, we briefed 40 you know, community leaders, religious leaders, and activists on a Zoom for 90 minutes on a Sunday night. So, I mean, you know, community and the input of folks who want to shape this have been elemental at all stages of what we're doing, and they will continue to be, because that is the way that the Wu administration does business. So we know what this language was intended to do. We know what this language paves the way for us to do, and we know fully what we're going to do. So I think that's what I would say on behalf of the administration in response to that. I mean,
well, I think, and I appreciate that, but also the existence of an ordinance, we don't create ordinances and laws in the city based on the administration or who's in power. We put them forth based on what we would like the city to function as. We can sit here and talk about Mayor Wu's intentions as a leader, and I think that a lot of those intentions have been, we've witnessed them, and we've seen them come to be, and then some of those we haven't. And there have been places where a lot of promises and a lot of commitments have been made, particularly around police and policing, where people in the community and even people on this council can say that we haven't really seen the promises come to fruition. And so this is not about whether or not Mayor Wu has a commitment to do that. This is about what this process looks like looking forward. Our ordinances exist so that it doesn't matter who is in power. The people in the city are protected, and the city is running in an effective way in the way that it prioritizes the people here. So this is not about whether or not Mayor Wu has a commitment to do that. A need for an ordinance, I'm not making an ordinance specifically for Mayor Wu, this is an ordinance for the city that would be there and would make sure that no matter who's in power, whether they be supportive of these jobs going to people in the city or not, that we can ensure that these jobs are going to be going to people in the city.
well, I think what I would say, and I don't want to get out ahead of my skis in taking a position on this, you know, on behalf of the administration, but I do understand that there's a process associated with this. You know, I think the administration will, as I've said, be more than happy to meet with community advocates and religious leaders, others who have a, you know, position or thoughts on how to implement this. And I think we certainly would take part in any hearing associated with an ordinance. I gather there's a sort of a process associated with passing an ordinance. At least that's what I'm so informed. So I think we could make that commitment, but I'm not sure what else we can do today.
No, not at all. And I think that and I said this when I spoke at the thing, that this is less about the contract and more about how we implement it, right? And there are ways that we can ensure that things are implemented properly. So thank you. I wanted to make sure that I put that on the table because, you know, 3 out of the 5 groups of people in the hierarchy not having a Boston residency, I think that should be alarming to the people of the city, and it should be alarming to the people on the council, that a lot of these jobs and a lot of this money, which, you know, even if it's not coming from the city, it's coming from we're bringing in all this money from these private entities that could be going for jobs in a city where 20% of the people are living below the poverty range, and almost 30% of children are living in poverty, to make sure that our jobs are going to the people who need it the most. Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Well, I don't, it's not directly in response to it, but I mean, I do think it's an important point that, you know, prior to ratification of this contract, I mean, it's something we've said repeatedly throughout the hearing, there was no mechanism for anyone to participate in the pay detail system who wasn't a sworn officer. So, again, the process of collective bargaining means you don't get 100% of what you want. You know, you take it in piece by piece, you get as much as you can, and at a certain point, you make a deal because you conclude that that's as good as you're going to do. So that's what we did here. I mean, you look, it's by no means perfect. I won't sit here and say that.
We are not in disagreement about the contract or what's in the contract or the process of collective bargaining. The ordinance is about how the city implements what's already in here. We're not, I am not at all trying to minimize the leaps and bounds that are being made with the contract that is being put in front of us. But, you know, in spite or regardless of who is in power, we do have a responsibility as a council to make sure that the jobs that we're creating are going to the people who need them here. That's at least my job as a district councilor, and I think everybody sees that job as their job here. And so this is not about, you know, it's not about the contract. I think that you all did an incredible job. I think that we got as much as we can. I think that, again, it puts us much further than we've ever been in the city. And without having an ordinance or assurances about who's going to get that job, it really just creates jobs for people who are not here in the city of Boston. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that on the record, and at least in my last days here as an elected official, do my best to make sure that these jobs are going to our people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. One of my final questions, and thank you for your advocacy for, you know, these good paying jobs. I believe they're $60 an hour. And, you know, a lot of our employees on the city of Boston have Boston residency requirements. So anything that we can do to make sure that, you know, our Boston residents are taking advantage of, you know, these opportunities is crucial to this body. One of my last questions is, can you provide, and I guess this question might be for Ellen, can you provide, you know, details on how the $30 million supplemental appropriation will be allocated to cover the FY24 cost items? You could submit that to the chair. You don't have to, you know, provide it now. But just like a detailed, itemized on how that is that all salary, or is there any other costs associated with that $30 million?
So it would be salary and overtime?
Okay. Yeah, if you could just break that down for us.
Between salary and overtime?
Yeah, between salary and overtime, that would be appreciated. Now we'll go to public testimony. We'll start off with those that are in person. Clifton Brathwaite, and if you could just state your name, any affiliation, or, you know, the neighborhood, and you'll have 2 minutes for public testimony.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell, and thank you everyone that's here in attendance. My name is Clifton Brathwaite, CLIFTONABRAITHWAITE, and I'm a community activist, community advocator, and I would like to help with the process with, I guess, basically being an ambassador at some type of level to encourage people in our community to become officers. So I just want to know, how would that work, and how could I make that start happening to be a part of the process to help encourage people in our community to get involved?
Yes, we could connect you with Nicole after this meeting to get you with the information to start spreading the news on, you know, when the, you know, application is open, to spread the word. So we'll definitely connect you with Nicole after this hearing.
Thank you. I do have a few other things, but it's not about the topics today, but I'd like to be able to speak to some of the councilors if they have a few minutes afterwards on some visions that I have for the new year.
All right, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go online, and thank you for your patience. We have a Mallory. All right, Mallory.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Mallory Hanor. I'm the Director of Families for Justice as Healing. I have been on since 10 a.m. I'm actually driving one of our members to court to do court support. I'm wondering if you could just extend me the grace to call someone else after, and then I can testify right after them. I just want to be able to pull over so that I can be safely heard, if that's okay.
Yes, we could grant you that grace. Yeah, there's no one else. So what we'll do is, you know what, I think I have one last, I can ask another question. Say that again? I haven't seen her statement.
Chairman, I am safely pulled over now.
All right, Mallory, the floor is yours.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your patience. Again, my name is Mallory Honora. I'm from Families for Justice as Healing, and I'm a proud member of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. We're a statewide organization that's headquarters is proudly in Roxbury. We have been organizing on this issue around the contract for years. We do greatly appreciate that civilians now have the ability to work details. I think this is a reflection of profoundly powerful community organizing and residents rising up to say more about what their vision for the city is and how dignified income is a key piece of safety and well-being. And in particular, I want to thank you for the leadership of Councilor Lara for keeping this a central issue. And I do want to say that Lou Mandarini for the city has been incredibly responsive, so I appreciate that. We have organized for years on this issue because we recognize that shifting power and money out of the Boston Police Department is one essential step towards creating the space for more significant investment in community well-being and for directly affected people to implement community-led and public health alternative responses that address harm, unmet mental health needs, and drug use. You heard the president of the BPPA say that this contract is a reward for officers, and so I think it makes sense to also pause and ask what are the community benefits of a contract like this, and to name that it doesn't match the vision that we had, and our organizations and communities were hoping for more. Communities were overwhelmingly talking about taking cops out of traffic enforcement, and this kind of contract, contract opens up detailed positions to even more kinds of police first before civilians. Real progress is measured by material change in our lives, and residents being last in line for detailed jobs on paper is painful to see. So moving forward, we know implementation is all that matters, and we're looking for a path toward dignified, unionized jobs for residents who have been most impacted by criminalization in the city. We've submitted some questions to City Council and appreciate the answers that were heard today, and we need even more about how the proposed new detail system is actually going to roll out, and how many jobs we can anticipate, and whether those jobs will be at prevailing wages for our residents. Our vision was a civilian-led office of union jobs for Boston residents with an explicit focus on residents who have been deeply impacted by criminalization, over-policing, and incarceration. Again and again, we've witnessed hesitation to invest in and give opportunities to the community, like community-based alternatives to policing, and even hesitance to fund participatory budgeting. Yet there's always a willingness to increase resources and extend more power into law enforcement, despite the failure of policing to address the needs of residents. I also want to take this moment to point out a very critically important matter that the administration buried in a press release about the BPPA contract, and that is the MOU with BPD and the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department to make Nashua Street a regional lockup, aka functioning as central booking. This city council itself has expressed significant concerns about a plan to have central booking at Nashua Street. At a November 2020 hearing, Councilor Mejia commented on a regional lockup plan, rightfully that we should not be putting people who have not been arraigned in a jail. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Creating a regional lockup is not an acceptable means to try to curb wildly excessive police overtime spending. and it underscores the need to put caps and limits on overtime in a contract.
Mallory,
Bill,
if you could wrap up, because you have surpassed your 2 minutes.
okay, I apologize. This bills to establish a regional lockup have been considered and rejected multiple times at the state level. We question the legal authority to set up the regional lockup, and we also question the total lack of transparency from the administration, including going on media and not even naming the correct jail where this is happening. Our members have been disappeared into Nashua Street. They've been held before their arraignment without an opportunity to be bailed. Mothers have not known where to find their children who have been arrested. So we need so much more transparency on this issue, and we're asking the City Council to use their oversight. Our organizations, as well as Massachusetts Bail Fund and the Material Aid and Advocacy Program, actually sent a letter to the entire City Council and to the Wu administration and to the BPD and to the Sheriff's Department with a huge list of questions and how this deeply impacts our community. And the only counselor to acknowledge receipt of that was Counselor Fernandez-Anderson. Thank you for that. We didn't get a response from the Wu administration or the BPD, and the Sheriff's Department only recently sent us the MOU. So this is a huge issue, and increasing criminalization and incarceration as a response to people using drugs is going to have deadly and disastrous impacts in addition to just violating people's civil and human rights. So we would love more answers about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your public testimony. Again, thank you to the administration. Thank you to those who publicly testified. And thank you to all my colleagues. Thank you to central staff for being here. And this hearing on dockets number 1578, 1579, 1812, and 1813 is adjourned.